orbits similar to the ones which we know are hitting the planet. That doesn't mean that they do, but it only means that they look very similar to the ones we know they do.
What else did you find? Should we be particularly concerned about anything?
One thing that we did find is that our neural network was able to go and identify a handful of asteroids which weren't considered potentially hazardous, that when we went and integrated them forward in time, they came quite close to Earth.
We find a handful which were not detected before or not considered being dangerous before, and we think they are potentially dangerous.
It's very hard to simulate kind of going forward in time an asteroid that's going to hit Earth because, well, the Earth is really small. And well, space is really big, and then you have to have very exact parameters to shoot an asteroid that goes and hits exactly Earth. And then Simon had the ingenious idea of not even trying to do that and just launching the asteroids from Earth's surface and integrating backwards in time.
It's very hard to make it hit. So you need a lot of calculations which all end up in nothing. And the idea was then like, well, let's not do that. This is basically what NASA is doing. NASA is taking an asteroid, making multiple copies of them, shooting them all forwards in time, calculating their orbits, and then see what fraction sort of gets close to Earth. Not even hitting Earth, but getting close to Earth. And that they call it a potential impactor. So you calculate the solar system forwards in time for, let's say, 1,000 years. And then you launch asteroids from the surface as if you go forwards in time, would fall on the surface. You calculate them backwards to today, and then you get your orbital parameters of today's asteroids, which you know will land on the planet. And those you can use as known impactors and compare with all the other asteroids in the solar system.
Can simulations and AI, can those things fill in the gaps where perhaps telescopes and other imaging tools can't?
Absolutely. Since the observations get more complex, the physics gets more complex. And if the physics get more complex, the mathematics becomes more complex. And at some point, you can't solve your problems analytically anymore. And then this is where the computer comes in. Now we have this trained neural network. We have a way of calculating in a fraction of a second whether or not an asteroid is potentially dangerous or not, and therefore deserves more attention or more time to spend on for really finding out if it is dangerous.
When it comes to hunting asteroids, time is critical.
What we can do about a potentially hazardous object depends a great deal on what we know about it and how much time we have before the encounter. We'd really like to find them when they're decades away, because the more time you have, the more options you have, and the less energy it takes to move an object aside.
It also means we might not have to resort to launching a nuclear warhead at an asteroid. Until recently, pretty much our only choice.
That's an option of last resort, in my opinion, yes. We have lots of options available. You can just simply bump into the object and just nudge it out of the way. That's one possibility, and that's kind of, in a way, sort of the simplest thing to think about, just nudging it off its path a little bit with, a massive object, a spacecraft, let's say. It's just kind of like bowling, if you will. If you have a long time or a long stretch of runway in the lane, just a very small twist on the bowling ball will make a big change in where it ultimately ends up. Another option would be something where you take a very big, massive spacecraft and you park it next to the object and you use the force of gravity as a towing rig. That takes longer, though, and you need to be able to send a pretty massive spacecraft, and it obviously depends a lot on how big the asteroid is. Other options start to get more and more complicated, and they range from painting one side of the object a white color and painting the other side dark, and then letting the pressure of light sort of perturb its orbit.
In a departure from the lab and computer simulations, NASA has real plans to rehearse kinetic impact deflection. In 2021, the agency will launch DART, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test mission, which will intercept a 160-meter asteroid in 2022. Better to practice now before we have to deal with an actual threat. In the meantime, discovering asteroids is our best bet. Thousands of scientists and amateur astronomers around the world make up an informal network that survey the heavens. But that may not be enough. NASA wants more resources to map our solar system and better technology.
We need to ramp up our network of sensors, and also we need to just continue to strengthen our network of international observers so that we can get follow-up because we find these objects when they're distributed all over the night sky.
Once we get more observations, we get better data, we can make better predictions.
If you look at the big impactors we have had in the last, let's say, 20 years, or maybe 30 years, or 50 years, most of them we haven't seen coming. So the danger, the real danger, I think, comes from the objects we don't know about, and not from the objects we do know about.
This particular natural disaster, like a lot of natural disasters and like climate change, is a problem of the global commons. So the thing that we risk collectively is that it sort of then becomes nobody's problem, and nobody takes ownership over it. The asteroids are all over the sky. They just truly cross boundaries and borders with a second's notice.
I kind of imagine in the future, maybe lots of small satellites around the Earth that are always going and looking outward. I mean, I think it's something worth investing in. It's our existence at stake, right?
The pandemic has affected everyone in different ways. Some pass the time by baking.
Homemade sourdough bread. Do I need to say more?
Some chose to binge watch Netflix.
It's your game.
Or maybe you started a garden oasis in your backyard.
Next, I'm going to put my lettuces in.
But for millions of others,
I'm going to be posting stocks that will boom.
They wanted to uproot the financial industry.
Let's just lock it on up and take $15,000.
Here's a stock that can change your life.
I see a stock going up and I buy it and I just watch it until it stops going up and then I sell it.
I have gained over $3 million.
I want some free money.
I don't think you can overstate the online communities or social media's influence on financial markets.
A large group of inexperienced investors who discuss their plans on social media platform Reddit have shaken up the stock market in a big way.
The stock that everybody's talking about right now is GameStop.
Video game retailer GameStop is set to continue their head-spinning ascent today.
The revolutionaries on Reddit are spanking Wall Street's ass.
The more these stocks go up, the more the big guys are getting creamed and losing billions of dollars.
This isn't a wealthy person's game anymore. Anyone can play it.
I took up a little bit of a new hobby, and I am interested in day trading.
As an investor nowadays, you don't have to look a specific way. You don't have to wear specific clothes. You don't have to be doing it from a trading floor on Wall Street in like a high-rise building in downtown Manhattan.
The narrative of what's driving the markets is no longer being held in secret offices in New York and Boston of privileged people talking to other privileged people. It's right out in the open. It's on Twitter, it's on Reddit.
From brokerage apps to Discord channels and subreddits to TikTok finfluencers, one of the last holdouts in the world of disruption, finance, is next in line.
Investing should be as ubiquitous as shopping online.
That's Vlad Tenev, the CEO of Robinhood, the online brokerage app, talking about how he wants his app to disrupt the world of stock trading like Amazon disrupted the world of home shopping.
And I think that speaks to exactly the mission that a platform like Robinhood has, which is to democratize investing.
Robinhood was started in 2013 by Vlad Tenev and Baiju Bhatt in, where else, Silicon Valley, as an alternative to the big brokerages, but with one big difference.
As they were building the social network around finances for people, they realized that there was a gap in the market and that free trading could become something that they could bring to the markets, they could disrupt the industry.
While no-fee trading is industry standard today, It was unheard of when it was first introduced.
The online brokerage industry was really innovative when they came on the scene 10, 15 years ago, but they kind of stopped innovating, where you haven't seen those commissions come down beyond $5 or $6 or $7. Robinhood think that by offering zero commission, that they're going to push people onto this platform.
And on top of no-fee trading, the customers Robinhood was courting have been long overlooked in the world of finance.
So the typical customer of a Charles Schwab, for example, is putting a lot more money in that brokerage account than the typical customer at Robinhood. Even today, with all of its popularity, the median account size is about $240.
There's Fidelities in the Schwabs and the E-Trades of the world. They look down their nose at those kind of accounts. I don't want a $1,000 account. They're just a headache. I want a $100,000 account.
This is key here, right? Because the thing about Robinhood that's different than every other single brokerage platform is how easy it is to use.
The design of the Robinhood app really has in mind a user who might be coming at this absolutely cold.
The fonts are very well sized, the shapes, the colors, all of that is something that the founders of Robinhood paid really close attention to.
And by creating an interface that catered to a newer investor, they were able to gather a pretty healthy group of customers. And by 2019, they had about 10 million customers.
Those 10 million customers were a huge success story for Robinhood, but no one could have predicted its explosion after the arrival of COVID-19.
Remain indoors to the greatest extent, and 100% of the non-essential workforce must stay home.
What we saw when the pandemic hit was the growth of Robinhood users absolutely turbocharged. And oddly, you saw this surge in interest in stock trading. Then they saw the absolute surge in 2020 in customer growth. And now, by many accounts, they have more than 20 million customers, which is pretty extraordinary. So the next step for them is to figure out how to monetize those users and how, even with their small account sizes, to get them to grow with the company and, as it releases more products, come along with them.
Robinhood would become one of the COVID economy's breakout successes. Robinhood traders, as they're called, became the shorthand explanation for the frenzy of often speculative retail investing after the pandemic lockdowns.
Kids wake up in the morning, they go on Robinhood. They're, in the shower, they check Robinhood. Kids are learning how the stock market works at 18 while they're at school, checking their phones in between classes because notifications pop up telling them what their stocks are doing that day.
With these new tools, millennials and Gen Z are investing in the market in ways their parents could have never even dreamt of.
That is sort of key when we talk about the divide between older and younger generations, is that the younger generation was exposed to so much more information and tools at their disposal to do what they want in the market.
The older generations, you never had the technology or the cost structure that you could play the markets like you can today. So you were stuck with giving your money to a professional investor and paying them a fee to do it.
When I speak to young kids, they tell me, I'm making mistakes, I'm losing money. I'm not a perfect investor, but I'm 18, and by the time I'm 30, which will be, 10 years from now, I'm gonna have interacted with the markets for a decade. And so it's a learning experience more so than anything else.
And you can look at it and you can say, wow, that's risk-taking, that's dumb, but if you could possibly shave 10, 20 years off your working life versus adding 5 years, I don't think you can fault people for that.
But Robinhood is only part of the puzzle. Sure, you can trade on it, but without research, information, and data, you're just blindly throwing darts at different stocks and hoping to strike it rich.
Wall Street forever has always run on what we now call narratives or memes. You know, people telling rumors to each other have been around for 100 years.
On Wall Street, information is its own currency. Historically, either you had it or you didn't, and the people who had it had a huge advantage.
In the past, those narratives and memes didn't have a network effect. It would be one person telling another person over the phone. In fact, when I broke into this business in the 80s, a lot of people used to complain that they weren't on the call list to get those ideas.
Social media changed all of that.
Fast forward to 2021, that's being done on the internet now. And that's being done on Discord and Twitter and StockTwits and Reddit. And the impact is very similar, but orders and orders of magnitude larger.
As social media has played a bigger part in our lives, it's also played a bigger and kind of more important role in how people find investing ideas online and on these platforms.
How do those ideas spread? On TikTok. Yes, that TikTok.
Soon may the weatherman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum.
People aren't just going to it for sea shanty videos.
The personal finance hashtag on TikTok has garnered 3.5 billion views from its 1 billion monthly active users. By comparison, videos found under the cooking and health tips hashtag have 2.6 and 2.1 billion views respectively.
The trajectory of Robinhood and TikTok were literally on par.
What happened in the stock market this week? So the word of the week is expectations.
Absolutely essential that you guys understand the risks of shorting.
And Kayla Kilbride and Kyla Scanlon are two of those financial influencer TikTokers, also known as finfluencers.
I think people still care about fashion, they care about culture, but it's also like there's this big behemoth thing called the stock market that we really don't know a whole lot about, and it's gatekept behind the industry. And so people like want to unpack that. And so my audience is, a lot of them are younger investors who are looking to hone their skills.
Tech and right up.
Kyla and Kayla are two of the more, let's say, professional TikTok influencers.
The Tesla ARK Bitcoin Biotech Risk Cluster.
I've been trading since high school, and it was a really interesting way for me to fill out my decision-making frameworks and to think about thinking. And I think that the more that we can have people thinking about finance, the better that we're going to progress as a society. I think it's a huge gap in our educational system.
If you're going to buy an option for a stock you think is going to go up, it's a call. So think of it like this. I made the options video where I was like, options are just like shopping. Rumor has it that this pallet's about to go up in price. So if I come in tomorrow, can I still buy it at said price? And a ton of women just like attacked that video and were like, you explain things so much better than my boyfriend or my professor, or like I could sit and listen to you all day. And I was like, this is what I was looking for.
But TikTok's algorithm does not reward calm and measured videos about responsible investing. It rewards this.
Watch this video for 30 seconds and you'll be rich for the rest of your life.
I try not to say the A word, the ALGO word, because TikTok listens to us.
The algorithm does impact how you feel. You know, you do notice which videos do better versus which videos do worse.
How do you catch someone's attention in less than 60 seconds? And how do you make it something that they're like, I need this in my life? Nearly impossible to do that in 60 seconds. But the people who perfect it are the people that you're going to watch and going to stick around.
And where people are sticking around? Reddit. And its nearly countless subreddits about finance. And by far the biggest one of those is Wall Street Bets.
There's a lot of social media platforms out there, but Reddit is like the social media platform for finance. Places like Wall Street Bets is where it all goes down.
Started in January 2012, it wasn't long before Wall Street Bets adopted a 4chan-like etiquette, leading to their tagline, like 4chan found a Bloomberg terminal.
We had all these unexplained stock moves, and we would be grasping for why stock XYZ jumped 20% in a day. And you would look at Wall Street Bets, and you would see people there talking about buying options in that stock, and it sort of, squared the circle, so to speak, and started making sense. And it was at that point that it was like, wow, we have to start paying attention to this.
Some people on the platform really spend tons of time, and others are just looking for entertainment and to have a little bit of fun, effectively gambling or looking for an outlet, trying to make a little bit of money.
Then on top of all of that, there were stimulus checks. Now, clearly, this money is going to people who need to use that to eat, to live, but there's a lot of people who use this money to invest in the stock market.
And it's not just stock tips. People quote-unquote YOLO their entire life savings or stimulus checks on a single stock. They post what is called gain and loss porn, screen-grabbing staggering hits and misses on stocks for the entire community to see.
I'm about to lose everything.
And while some of the people on Wall Street Bets are novice investors, the community contains multitudes.
In one respect, what it did show us among these network groups is they are very sophisticated. They're not a bunch of ignorant people talking to other ignorant people.
And this is where the pieces of the puzzle all come together to wreak havoc on Wall Street for a solid week in early 2021.
It's pretty clear that the combination of more people having retail brokerage accounts and trading apps and more people being stuck at home looking for some kind of entertainment and some kind of community online came together in this very singular way.
What came together is GameStop.
Let's go back to the beginnings of what happened with GameStop a couple of years ago. On the boards like Reddit and StockTwit, a lot of people were talking about GameStop as being attractive value.
Some of them are even, Wall Street alums who left the industry and now still have access to tools that they can use to improve their financial well-being and make very good decisions. And I think Roaring Kitty is a perfect example of that.
GameStop is one of the most compelling asymmetric opportunities in the market today. Really, I don't understand how you could disagree with that.
At the same time that this crowd was talking it up, the hedge fund institutional crowd didn't like this stock at all, and it had the largest short interest of any stock in the New York Stock Exchange going into late 2020.
Short selling is a bet that a stock price will fall, and it's a fairly simple concept. An investor borrows a stock and then sells it. The investor is betting on buying the stock back later for a lower price, before returning it to the original owner, pocketing the price difference.
What a short seller would tell you is that they almost act as a policeman in financial markets, or they're at least looking for companies that aren't what they say they are. And that can range anywhere from an outright fraud that some short sellers try to expose to just a company that's not worth as much as investors think it is.
The problem is, if the stock price rises, the short seller has to come up with the money to buy the stock back. And the more it rises, the more it costs. And that's what's called a short squeeze. And the hedge fund Melvin Capital was on the wrong end of that squeeze.
Melvin Capital lost over 50% of its money in the month of January alone, just from being caught in the short squeeze of the stock.
This is where the disruption comes in.
One of the most wild stories you're ever going to see. GameStop shares absolutely going nuts.
In less than a year, the company's stock has jumped from less than $3 a share to almost $350.
Cheers, everybody!
Roaring Kitty has turned $50,000 or so investment into some $14 million.
Whoa!
Investors all over social media use the free trading app Robinhood to wreak havoc on Wall Street.
They're actually piling on into some of these stocks to really hurt the professional short sellers.
And they all used Reddit, Twitter, TikTok, and Discord to tell one another to keep buying and, quote, hold the line and not sell GameStop.
People are getting cheerleaded for jumping in, buying at the highs. They're saying, keep going.
And it was working too, until
Thursday morning, the trading app Robinhood sent out this tweet. In light of current market volatility, we are restricting transactions, including GameStop.
People were really angry.
Robinhood was supposed to allow the regular people to play the same game these big boys are playing. But instead, we were all taken for schmucks, and they screwed us.
Shares of GameStop are jumping again now that retail investors are being allowed to buy shares of the stock.
But what we learned is that when people organize online, they have the ability to disrupt the market.
And it was a big sign the ivory walls of the institution aren't as powerful as maybe the institutions thought them to be. I don't know if pumping up GameStop was the best use of billions of dollars, but I think that as a signal to society, it was pretty interesting and powerful.
The GameStop saga was so impactful that both Vlad Tenev and Roaring Kitty were called in to testify before Congress to clarify each of their roles in the saga.
One thing that's emerged from the congressional hearings is that they're interested in how retail brokerages make money and whether they're keeping the best interest of their customers in mind, but it's pretty fuzzy as far as what they would actually do as a result.
While the frenzy around GameStop eventually subsided, it didn't take long for retail investors to find other areas to invest their money.
Take a look at Bitcoin going bananas over the weekend.
Bitcoin forms a brand new all-time high.
It was after GameStop started to drop that we saw Bitcoin really go up to over 60,000.
How much further does this rally have to run?
It's compelling to say that money shifted from one venue to the other.
While correlation doesn't equal causation, there's a chart out there showing an inverse correlation on meme stocks going down and cryptocurrencies going up.
There's definitely an aspect where people are making money on stocks and then moving, they're agnostic, they're not hedge funds. They can invest wherever the hell they want. It's a classic sort of momentum trade. They're going to wherever the winners are and they're willing to jump on and, ride it.
So whether it's meme stocks like GameStop, meme coins like Dogecoin, or entirely new ways to invest in art like NFTs, the new kind of retail investor is making its presence known.
Over the next 10, maybe 15 years, you're going to continue to see, whether by choice or by force, that baton go from older generations to younger generations. I don't think any single app is going to be the thing that disrupts. I think people are the disruptors.
How people get ideas about what to invest in has become increasingly entwined with social media. And as social media companies govern more and more of our lives, the fact that now they're tied in more intimately to people's wallets is something that we might want to understand better.
Usually what disruption, I think, means is technology comes in, whether it's blogs to the newspapers or online retailing to brick and mortar. They come in and they're in the same business, but they just do it in such a gigantic cost savings that it causes everybody to switch. Well, that's the risk that happens here, is that it's so much cheaper to just manage your own money. We're not there yet, but costs and conveniences are moving in that direction. So I'd say, Wall Street, you haven't been disrupted yet, but you could be in the coming years, and that the final chapter on this story hasn't been written.
Meet Bloomberg's own David Nicholson. Now, his happy place is out in the field, on the open road. But like the rest of the world lately, he's been working from home a lot more than he's used to. COVID-19 has prompted a massive urban exodus as professionals of every ilk yearn for more space to live and work. As a result, rural areas have exploded, and they're poised to experience a resurgence as more and more families pack up and leave the big city to try out life in the burbs. But there's one problem with that. Not all internet speeds are created equal. Anyone who might need to upload or download large files for a living may not want to pack up and move to that cabin in the woods just yet. Now, David's house isn't a cabin, but it is in the woods, and inexplicably, his internet is workable.
My internet is okay. I pay a lot for it. It's around $140 a month. The download speed's great. and the upload speed is terrible, which is really bad for my work because I have to upload these massive files. But I'm definitely one of the more lucky ones in this community. Just a few miles down the road, my buddy has awful internet.
It's usually under 2 down and under 0.2 up, so it's often unusable.
Some days it's around 1, and other times it'll drop down to about 0.2, 0.3.
I just want to be able to have internet at my house without having to go outside the normal ways of acquiring internet. It's really frustrating.
We're literally a few miles away from downtown, and it just cuts off.
This is a problem, and the solutions are not there yet, because getting high-speed internet in rural areas en masse is something our providers may simply not be ready for.
If your internet service doesn't have fast download and upload speeds, then you don't have high-speed harmony. You have.
Americans on average pay about $70 a month for internet at home. But in rural areas, it could cost a lot more for a lot less service.
So the pricing for a fixed wireless provider here can be something between $80 and $150 for about 25 megabits per second. However, gigabit service, which is 1,000 megabits per second and symmetrical, is running at about $119 a month or $130 a month.
That's John Paul. He co-owns Spiral Fiber, an internet service provider here in Nevada County, California. And for the past 10 years, he's been trying to bring an affordable fiber optic network to town. It all started when he applied to be part of the pilot program for Google's fiber service.
Across the country, civic boosters have been going to extremes, chanting, singing, Google in the morning, and marching, trying to get the search engine giant to look at their town.
The internet these days is crucial to be in the world, to be a part of the world, and to be connected to your community.
Google ultimately went with Kansas City, Missouri, which left Paul on a mission to get funding to lay out fiber optic networks for gigabit service. Over the next several years, he would attend conferences and pitch venture capitalists and apply for grants to make his vision come to life.
One of the biggest roadblocks to building infrastructure for the internet here in the United States are the existing large providers. They have their land staked out. They would prefer that nobody come in and compete against them. In 2013, we applied for a grant. We went down and met with the commissioners at the California Public Utilities Commission. It was an arduous process to get funded, but we finally did against all odds. We got a $16 million grant, and then we went out to seek venture capital.
Then, in March of 2020, the pandemic hit the world.
Everybody got locked down, and everybody came home, and everybody started using the internet. And I remember seeing on one of the local fixed wireless providers' websites, they've said, hey, we know you're all staying home, but please don't use too much video, and please don't use too much bandwidth. And I thought, that doesn't work.
The U.S. connectivity gap is far greater compared to countries that are considered its peers economically. Some developing nations actually have better internet than rural America, like in Kenya, which has a state-of-the-art fiber optic network fed in from their coastline. The American connectivity gap does largely affect rural areas that are either outside of service coverage or simply prohibitively expensive. This is Rebecca. She and her family moved to Nevada County just a couple miles down the road from David. They took for granted that high-speed internet would just exist in the area, and it's not something they even bothered to check on before buying their house. Turns out, all they got was dial-up.
We wanted to move where we had a little more space, room for the kids to run around, just be out in the mountains a little bit more. Having come from a bigger city area where Wi-Fi is pretty readily available, we hadn't really considered that in our purchasing of the house, whether that would be an option or not. When school started, and now that we are remote learning with our children and we're doing everything from home, we didn't have the option to do that at our house. So every day when school would start, we'd have to pack the kids up and we'd go to my in-laws' home. They have a little cabin up in this area that does have Wi-Fi already.
Rebecca's situation is the norm in rural America.
According to data from the Federal Communications Commission, just 4% of urban Americans lack access to broadband internet. That's compared to almost 40% of people who live in rural areas. But while that was the case, there were also racial and socioeconomic divides in terms of who had that access. In addition to that geographic difference, low-income African American students, Latino students, and first-generation college students were more likely than others to have only one device at home that's shared among multiple siblings and or lack access to that actual connection.
For most American towns, there's also a lack of competition, forcing internet prices up. And large providers like AT&T and Comcast aren't incentivized to expand service to these rural communities.
This is how Xfinity makes life simple, easy, awesome.
So in our area, we have a small imprint of Comcast, but they're not going to go out to the more rural areas. It's just not cost effective for them to do it as a large company.
In order to lay fiber cable, you're actually physically digging trenches into the ground. And for internet service providers, they're primarily focused on maximizing their profits. And so the fewer customers you have, in any square mile and the more fiber you have to lay, that's just kind of harder to pencil out from a purely economic standpoint.
AT&T released a statement on the matter, expressing the need and desire for government assistance to fund fiber optic expansion to areas deemed unprofitable. Comcast released a similar statement encouraging more public-private collaboration on this effort. Federal agencies do offer grants to help communities build broadband networks, but many have argued that there's not enough flexibility on how to use these funds. The COVID-19 relief package passed by Congress in March and signed by President Donald Trump awarded $43.3 million to 51 projects on the East Coast alone. But it also stipulated that these projects needed to be up and running by December 30th. For contractors who plan projects months and years in advance, it's a scramble to rearrange their schedules to meet that deadline.
So what we've been asking the federal government to consider is at least have, as long as the projects are getting started, knowing the projects are being put into place to expand both remote learning, working from home, and opportunities like that that are truly driven from COVID. We're moving as fast as we can regardless, but hopefully they'll give us some more time.
Talking to John Paul, it's clear that he believes broadband is something that can transform a community and should be considered a public good.
One of the first communities to come on in the United States with full-on gigabit service was Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, they're a bigger city, but they're a city that was economically in a downturn. In the last 15 years, the city of Chattanooga has turned around in an amazing way. It's a nexus for young people to move to. It's a place where technology happens.
It's not just about logging on to Zoom, to connect with your colleagues who might be in New York City. It's also your ability as a small business, operating in the town of Nevada City or wherever it may be to quickly upload your payroll documents or something onto the cloud, or to quickly, swipe a customer's credit card. There's just some really basic business functions and mechanics that I think people in big cities really take for granted, and that are just going to be a much bigger challenge for small business owners in rural areas.
Historically, the marginalized people, you call them as untouchables or Dalits, they have been kept away from the center of the knowledge. Once you are born into a caste, it is very difficult for you to grow beyond that. You are stuck in that identity. I think education is the best way of liberating them. So that's how I chose to work in education sector. The kind of education that we are giving to the marginalized people is going to change not just the fate of these communities in Telangana, but it is going to be the source of inspiration, source of hope for all the marginalized in this country.
Greatest blight in India is the system of caste.
For generations of Indians, the social code known as the caste system has defined how people earn a living and whom they marry. Although outlawed 7 decades ago, castes remain a significant factor in deciding everything, from family ties and cultural traditions to educational and economic opportunities. Dalits, people who are on the lowest rung of the caste system, constitute almost 1/5 of India's population of 1.3 billion. Not able to afford the high tuition of private schools, many are forced to attend government-funded institutions, which in the past have suffered from poor infrastructure, lower education standards, and high student-to-teacher ratios. But Dr. Praveen Kumar is trying to change that.
I am currently working as head of Telangana Social Welfare Residential Schools. So totally above 400 schools I manage. These are all residential schools for the students who are historically marginalized but talented and then poor.
My friend also
Of them, 60% are girls and then 40% are boys, because girls are more marginalized among the marginalized. Their voices are always suppressed. My approach to improve the conditions in the schools has been put your eyes and ears on the ground always. Talk to the parents, talk to the teachers, talk to the students, stay in the schools and then understand their problems, their challenges, both in classrooms and then the corridors and the dorms. Then go to the dining halls and see what kind of food they are eating, and then go to their homes and then what kind of food they are getting and what kind of challenges the parents have. One of the important changes that I brought in after I took over was to complete the transformation of mother tongue to English medium, because English medium, as I said, English is the language of emancipation. A language that connects you to the whole body of knowledge in the world. So we had to train a lot of teachers.
refer to the dictionary also, okay, and find out the new meanings, as well as you're going to describe about. Hey, Richita, how are you? Hi, Sindhu. Fine, thank you. And how about you? I'm fine too. It's been a long time.
Identity is extremely important. There is a scientific evidence to prove that your sense of identity is extremely crucial to your growth as a successful human being in your life. If you accept an identity which is very humiliating, which reminds you of very painful past, I think that identity will not help you to grow. I'm not saying that you should forget your past. I'm not saying that, but that should not be the bubble in which you must live always. Sweros is an alternative identity. S stands for state, W stands for welfare, Aero, SW and then Aero is Swero. So the idea is your dreams have to be skybound. So that is what we are trying to achieve by changing the identities. Like, you say, I'm a Swero and I aim to be a doctor. I am a Swero, I aim to be a top-notch engineer. I am a Swero, I aim to be a top bureaucrat of this country. I'm a Swero, I want to be a very good actor or, a musician in this world. So these are the positive images that are associated with the identity. Just to give an example to you, in 2012, in our institution, we used to produce about 6 doctors per year. But because of our, this self-liberating ideology of Sveroism, We have, this year, we have produced about 189 doctors. This is phenomenal for any poorest of the poor people. You know how difficult it is to get into a medical colleges in this country. So, but today, because of this ideology, the students have been able to achieve this, feat. Pujita has been a farm laborer, and her parents themselves are agricultural laborers. And then this girl used to sell vegetables, but thanks to the residential education institutions, she came to the Gaulidoddi campus, and then she toiled very hard for 1 year, despite many problems. And today, I'm so happy to share with you that she has joined one of the prestigious medical colleges in the state of Telangana, Usmania Medical College, and then in future, she hopes to be a gynecologist. So this is the journey our children are hoping for. Similarly, the Mount Everest expedition. Mount Everest expedition, we are very fortunate enough to place the youngest ever female in the history of this world on the peak of Mount Everest. How did this happen? It's all because of an ideology that helps you to liberate yourself. We got a lot of extracurricular activities, and most of them got institutionalized now. So, for example, music. Similarly, the games. We have so many coaching academy. We have boxing academy, we have wrestling academy, we have handball academy. So we have, kabaddi, the traditional Indian sport. We have golf. We have introduced the golf also. Like golf is generally played by so-called rich people, but today even poorest of the poor people also are being trained in golf in our schools. Wow. So our intention has been to give all 360 degrees, type of opportunities to the students, so that whoever is interested in whatever activity, they can go and then do it. Break the barriers, break the fence, at least mentally, because poor people have been programmed to be victims, programmed to be subjugated, programmed to be on the margins, always, programmed to feel inferior. We wanted to change on that. There are certain games which are exclusive to rich people. There are certain languages which are exclusive to middle class and upper middle class in this country. To put it in one word, the sole aim of introducing all these co-curricular activities is to break the stereotypes which are recklessly imposed on these people.
Their stereotypes Dr. Kumar knows all too well. Born a Dalit, his grandparents were labourers and access to the village well was restricted. Dr. Kumar credits his parents' belief in the power of education with helping him realise his aspirations. He went on to join the Indian Police Service, attended Harvard University, and then began pursuing educational reforms back home.
I attribute whatever I am today, it's to my mother primarily. They educated me in the village, although there were no good schools. So then I stayed in social welfare hostels, the hostels which are managed by government for the poorest of the poor kids. I passed with reasonably good grades. Then I went to university, and then I faced worst form of discrimination in the universities. Like there were, in those days I'm talking about, so the bathrooms and the toilets were exclusively meant for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. We used to fight discrimination on one hand, and then again, try to excel in academics, day in and day out. So that's how I came to education, because I deeply believe that education is the only important weapon that can really, place the poorest of the poor people from a very victimhood orbit to a prosperous orbit. I think in future, this is going to be a game changer for the marginalized in this country.
If you look at a thermal image of a city and then compare that to a map of vegetation, you'll find that where there's greenery, the temperature is lower. That's because things like asphalt, concrete, and shingled roofs absorb more heat from the sun than trees. This is the urban heat island effect, and it accounts for higher temperatures in cities, often by several degrees compared with their surroundings. It's becoming a huge risk to human health as growing urban populations exacerbate the heating effects of climate change. Heat waves kill more people than any other extreme weather event, more than tornadoes, hurricanes, and even floods. That's why urban heat island mitigation strategies are being studied in Singapore by a group of researchers. The government-backed project called Cooling Singapore is now in the process of combining everything they've learned to create a digital tool that can help cities all over the world, starting with Singapore. In Singapore, close to the equator, temperatures regularly rise above 32 degrees Celsius or 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And the city structures only make it worse.
And that is also the case for Singapore, which is basically a concrete jungle, more urbanized, more developed city. And even in Singapore, what you have is a situation whereby there's a temperature difference of 7 degrees Celsius between the more urbanized and the more rural areas.
The government has taken drastic steps to keep temperatures down. This is Gardens by the Bay, an award-winning park. And inside this greenhouse is a pleasant 24 degrees. That's because the dome, along with 24 nearby towers full of thousands of people, is chilled by what's probably the world's largest underground district cooling system. It uses a large central plant that cools water and then pipes it into banks, residential towers, an exhibition center, shopping malls, and the city's iconic Marina Bay Sands hotel and casino complex.
So one of the biggest perks of using this system for the buildings is that they can save 40% in terms of electricity usage compared to your traditional air conditioners.
And with Singapore relying on natural gas for most of its power, this new system means emission savings equivalent to removing 10,000 cars from the city's roads. That has big implications for the rest of the world. If things stay as they are, more than a third of the world's electricity could end up being used to cool buildings and vehicles by 2050.
As the world gets hotter, gets warmer, there is a greater need for air conditioning and as well as refrigerators, for instance. And the more people are buying these household appliances, the more energy usage they use, and they release heat more, and that then exacerbates climate change.
It's a vicious circle. And so since 2017, researchers at Cooling Singapore have been identifying design solutions that reduce our need for so much cool air in the first place.
One thing many cities have in common, and that's the importance of vegetation. That's a very important measure to mitigate the urban heat because of the shading effect, of course, and the psychological effects of the vegetation, and also because of the possible evaporative cooling effect of the vegetation. Vegetation can be, of course, on the ground floor in form of trees and shrubs, and you can walk under them. This is the so-called canopy layer that the vegetation forms above us. But vegetation can also go up the facades of buildings, and it can go to the roof of the buildings.
Luckily, Singapore has been striving for the garden city feel for quite some time. It was a vision initially introduced by then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew in 1967 to make life more pleasant for people. And today, Singapore is one of the world's greenest cities in terms of urban vegetation. Kampung Admiralty, a community centre that contains health facilities and social spaces, now provides more green space than the plot of land it was originally built on. It's topped by a roofscape of staggered terraces covered in local plants, which functions as a community park, and a village green in the centre that contains farm plots for residents to tend to. Park Royal on Pickering was designed as a hotel in a garden that doubled the green growing potential of its site. There's now 15,000 metres of sky gardens, reflecting pools, waterfalls, planted terraces and green walls. And the government has big plans as well.
Singapore actually has a plan to plant 1 million trees and add more green spaces over the next 10 years. It is actually a mix of wanting to reduce the urban heat island effect, but on the other hand is also to get the people to be more connected to nature.
But it's not enough. The city-state has still been warming twice as quickly as the world average over the past 6 decades. That's why Cooling Singapore has developed a catalogue of other potential heat mitigation measures.
When you try to mitigate the urban heat island effect in a city or in any building, in a village as well, the first place to start is by shading of the windows. You have to keep areas clear so that the wind can move through it. Water of a certain depth can act as a very good thermal buffer. If you have to construct heavy buildings such as high-rises, at least you can make the surface, the facade, less heavy, and you can protect it from direct sun penetration. We have to make sure that no combustion engines will be in the city in the middle, in the medium to long-term range. So ideally, the electricity production is outside of the city, and you bring just the clean electricity into the city. You can at least minimize the use of energy in the city, and you can start to slowly convert the roofs, the facades of the city into production areas for renewable energy. In Singapore, unfortunately, this is a limited option, but in the long run, it could produce up to 20-25% of the energy, of the electricity needed in Singapore, if all the roofs and the areas in the buildings, on the facades would be used to do that.
With so many different ideas, Cooling Singapore is also designing a virtual model of the city to test them out. It's called a Digital Urban Climate Twin, or DUCT, that will calculate how each element of the city's design will impact the urban heat island effect.
That means we model not only the geometry of the buildings digitally, but also we model the transportation, the insulation, the temperature, the radiation coming from the sun, the weather, the local climate, the even very, very microclimate of the city, the water, the movement of people in the city. We can invent scenarios, we can design scenarios, test them before we actually build them, and if they test very well and we are sure that they will function, then we can start to build them and put them into reality.
Singapore will be using this new tool to figure out which actions it should take next. And the model can be applied to any city, whether it needs to keep heat out or keep heat in, which will ultimately save energy, slow climate change, and improve our quality of life.
So this is something that Singapore will be able to export, maybe even together with its city development systems that it already has. Singapore is one of the very few cities in the world that really combine this scientific approach with a very well-established urban redesign and urban design approach. Through its agencies and the combination of its agencies, it has achieved a lot in the past. If it keeps following the scientific path and the combination with the other knowledge in the city already, we think that it will be a very comfortable and very livable city in the future, even more than today.
Times are tough. Jobs are scarce. It's risky to be outside and around others. Seems like there's very few ways to make extra money during a pandemic. So I guess I'll just hunker down and binge social media until this all blows over. Wait, don't these people make money? How do these people make money? Streamers, YouTubers, Twitch stars. How do they make money? Is it a lot? Is it a lot of work? I know, I gotta ask somebody in the biz, and I got just the guy. Austin John Plays.
This is your full-time job now, right? As of November of last year, yes. This was always just kind of like a side thing. Like, any money that I made from doing my videos and whatever else, I never touched that because I didn't really think of that as being like real money. And then it started coming in more and more. And then it was like I hit my first day that I broke $1,000 and I was like, this is actually going to be money. How did the YouTube channel come to be? When the game Pokemon Sun and Moon came out for the 3DS, there was like things that I learned about the game, and then I wanted to just share that information with people. And at the time, I didn't have any way to capture a screen or anything, so I found like generic footage and I kind of put it all together with so much editing. And that video got 6 views. And then 2 days later, I made another one, and that one got 12 views. And then I just started pumping out more and more content, and people were like, this guy knows what he's talking about. It really just started building on top of itself, and then it was like, my channel really focuses on tips and tricks. So I play a straight 18 hours, and I'll finish the game or get to about the 40-hour mark, and then I'll make my first video. While I'm going through, I have a giant notepad and just scribbles everywhere, and I make these notes of like the things that stumped me, so I know the things that may stump other people. What do you need to think about if you're building your YouTube channel? 1, you need to do something that you're passionate about. Not that you like, not that you think you're gonna make money on, something you're passionate about. The other thing is something that other people are passionate about. It holds a special place to them. And third is, it needs to be something that people are gonna seek out information on. In order to enter into the marketplace, you either need to be better than everyone else, you either need to be faster than everyone else, or you need to be more accessible than everyone else. And you can't be more accessible because it's already on the platform. Granted, if you understand how the algorithm works, which is very similar to Google Analytics, then yeah, you can have a little bit of a head start. But if you're not doing it faster, and if you're not doing it better than everyone else, then why should anyone watch your channel? So my income as a YouTuber kind of breaks down to 3 different ways. 1, which is the bulk of it, which is ad revenue. Whenever you go and you watch a video and then there's an ad and then you wait 5 seconds and you hit the bottom right corner and then you go on to the next video, or a non-skippable ad, or the video starts immediately, you get the little banner ad at the bottom, or if you scroll down from the video, the first thing that shows there is an ad. Those are the 4 different types of ads that can appear on every single YouTube video. And all of them pay a certain amount. It varies on lots of things, like the country of the person who posts it, the country of the person who watches it, the time of year, where you are in the quarter, if there's anything going on with a reduction in ad revenue. Like, great example, COVID-19, companies weren't spending as much on advertising. So because of that, CPM went down. CPM stands for click per thousand. I'm using the Roman numeral for 1,000. And that means that for every 1,000 views, you get a certain amount of money. Now, on low ads, when I first started off, my CPM was 30 cents. So every 1,000 views, I made 30 cents. But then once I signed with an MCN and I started making more quality content and more engaging content, some of my better videos and certain times of the year, I can see CPMs as high as $12 to $14. And there's a big fluctuation between, you know, if I post a video when there's no ads being spent like January and February, that's a reason a lot of your favorite YouTubers and also TV shows don't post new videos in that time of year because ad rates are down. Why are they going to make content then? Instead, you're recording and you're bulking up for when ad revenue is higher. The second way that a YouTuber makes income is support, crowdfunding, things like that. When I first started off, Patreon was really the only option, but then they started rolling out supporters and members for YouTube channels. So whenever I have a live stream, you can click a button and then you can become a member, and then you get special icons next to your name. I believe they're called badges, or on any video, you can hit the join button and that helps support the channel. And then the third aspect of that would be merch. And for me, my merch has been somewhat basic. In fact, I'm wearing one of my t-shirts from last year right now. You have to endure the times that your first video gets 6 views, that you posted on Reddit and they say, shut up, and then an auto mod bans you. You have to go through that, because until you go through that and you discover why you're doing it, you're not doing it for other people, you're doing it for yourself. If you're not loving what you do, then it's not worth it.
Huh. So make a channel about something that I'm passionate about. Oh, sweet. I guess I can make the channel about that. Now, how do I grow an audience? How do I get popular?
It's all about diversification, right? You have to have a massive Twitter following. You have to have a massive Instagram following. You have to have a massive YouTube following. Of course, you have to be on Twitch, which is the key platform. But basically, any way you can get in front of your audience, you can engage with your audience, is going to drive those clicks, which ultimately drives the advertiser revenue that you get back from all of these platforms.
It's me and Dan playing video games and talking in a funny manner over them.
They're not just people who are good at games, they're actually people who are good at online engagement, online entertainment, first and foremost.
You have the right to remain stylish. Anything you wear can and will be used against you in the court of fashion.
The streamer is either very, very talented at the game. The best player in the game is generally going to draw a crowd because people like watching people who are very good. On the other hand, they're either very, very good or funny, charismatic, whatever it is on that side.
Oh, no.
You know, it becomes more of a show where they talk about other things outside of the gaming world, and gaming becomes really just a backdrop and an excuse to engage with that audience.
There were those weird, like, Ronald McDonald, like, straight to VHS movies. You remember those?
I'm personable, I'm chatty. I would kind of, you know, when boring things were happening in the game, I would ramble on about, you know, movies I'd watched or books I'd read and, you know, or conversations I'd had and stuff like that. And so I think being personable was a big part of that.
It's not just getting on and playing games. It's getting on and being an entertainer. You are putting on a show.
All right, now let me go ahead and grab the samurai sword that every gym has. Okay, he's dead.
To have a larger audience and to have that audience, I think, stay with you, you have to bring something extra. You know, you have to find your niche. You have to find what works and what connects with the audience and what makes them laugh and what makes them keep coming back.
You gotta make it a little more exciting, all right? Throw in a hanging bishop. Have everybody in suspense for a moment.
think the real most important thing is to just get used to being on camera. Like in any sort of performance thing, is get used to talking on camera. You know, my first few videos were terrible, but because I sat down and did it for 6 to 8 hours a day, I just got used to talking and I got over that uncomfortable hump.
If you go into Twitch purely with the expectation that you're going to make money, make a job out of it, have all this growth, and it's going to be great, you're probably going to burn out prior to getting to that point, because there's very little payoff for a long time, right? Like multiple years generally before you really start to see a payoff. And so, you know, those first few times you're streaming, nobody is there. One person shows up every 30 minutes, says hi maybe, and leaves, right? Like, it's very discouraging, I think, for a lot of people. And so you have to be there just loving it. You have to love talking to yourself when nobody is around. You have to love just the game that you're playing, all of that stuff, because it takes a while. And I think a majority of people burn out prior to getting to the like profitable point of it.
And there you have it. My very own YouTube, Twitch, Discord, and streaming channels all ready to go live. It's a veritable social media ecosystem just on the verge of thriving. So, don't forget to smash like and subscribe, and visit my Patreon for perks. Also, go to my merch page. And one last thing, stay cool, my friends.
This is live stream shopping, one of the hottest trends in China. Every night, tens of millions of people watch live shows hosted by influencers like Thea and buy the products they recommend. On e-commerce and social apps like Taobao and Douyin, the sister app of TikTok.
我觉得已经改变了大家的购物的方式。其实各种各样的产品，哪怕你不买，你也可以来看。当然，你看了，你就有可能会买。
It's not about, only shopping. It's about the experience. It's about having fun. You got to see 3D. You got to see in some kind of action. It's almost like a theater act.
The internet craze has taken over China. By the end of 2020, the country had almost 400 million live stream shopping users. China's live stream e-commerce market has also grown dramatically, with an estimated value of $161 billion in 2020. It's becoming popular outside China as well. So, is live streaming the future of shopping? Live streaming is not a new thing. In China, it started in 2015 with the rollout of 4G. And it was first used for entertainment and socializing. Many live streamers performed for their followers or chatted to them, making money by receiving virtual currency and gifts. In the West, live streaming is mainly the domain of avid gamers. In China, it's broken into e-commerce.
China actually has a very big e-commerce empire, so it uses these super apps, what we call that you have payment, you have search of information, you have recommendation system, and you have huge amount of goods available on the platform, and as well as a lot of consumers. So with this advantage, they merge these features of live streaming to make the influencers actually sell goods.
Here is a perfect choice: nice neutrals, beautiful print, nothing overwhelming, and the warmth and comfort of flannel. This is item number
Traditional TV shopping involves a one-way direction, whereby a host introduces a product, demonstrates certain things, and say, call this number or something. But live stream shopping is live. That in itself is a very, very big difference that causes different psychology. And live stream shopping is a very entertaining way of actually engaging someone else.
When you shop, actually, this live streaming video will continue. It will minimize into a corner, and you can like buy the items and pay all on the same app. And after that, the live streaming screen will just enlarge by itself, and the promoter will come back to screen. So it's like very convenient.
Taobao, one of China's biggest e-commerce platforms owned by tech giant Alibaba, added a live streaming function in early 2016. In the following years, other e-commerce and social platforms like JD and Douyin also integrated this feature.
开头的时候还是有很多的挑战的，对画面的这个流畅，然后是否能够很真实的去还原商品，它其实在这个上面是有很高的这个门槛跟技术的这个卡口在的。不管是我们的这个用户的接受度，还是商家的这个上手的这个难度都很高，但是这几年下来，基本上难点在不断被突破的。
Over $70 billion worth of goods was sold via live stream on Taobao in the year through March 2021. Latest surveys show that over 60% of live stream users in China were watching shopping shows, and over 65% of them shopped at least once via live stream. In 2020, live stream shopping got a huge boost during the pandemic, when millions of people were in lockdown and many retailers were pushed online.
People, during the lockdown, felt like there's a need for more social interactions. This live platform creates an interesting kind of environment that gives people the sense that I'm actually interacting with you. And then live stream shopping brings in a lot more variety of things that people could buy and satisfy, the sense of like losing control, especially during the pandemic.
At the heart of this craze are the top influencers who have tens of millions of followers and sell products worth millions of dollars every night. They often use their star power to get bargains from retailers, which in turn boosts their own sales and influence.
So if you think about China's live streaming, you have to know the king and queen of the influencers. The queen of live streaming, Via, she is actually having the biggest viewership and the biggest sales volume for a long time on Taobao platform. She can sell everything from like Gucci sunglasses, lipsticks, homes, and cars. One time she offered her followers to go on a Tesla ride with her, and she even, for once, sold a rocket launch in her live streaming room for 40 million yuan. The king will be Li Jiaqi, more widely known as Lipstick's brother. He used to be a cosmetic sales before he turned into live streaming e-commerce. And he knows a lot about the cosmetics. So he's the one that will actually put the lipsticks on himself when he's on the show.
Top live streamers like Via and Li Jiaqi have become celebrities in China and can earn millions of dollars a year. Although not everyone can be as popular, mid-ranking live streamers like Tiffany still earn a good income through sales commissions.
如果说单从收入方面来讲的话，那主播的收入是比普通的工作要高很多。但是呢，主播这个工作时刻对身体，包括对精神都有很大的一个考验的。就是每天需要集中精力，然后长达5-6个小时，这种状态是很累的。而且这5-6个小时的话，你是脑子是不停的，然后嘴巴是不停的，然后手也是不停的，眼睛也是不停的。像我们做主播，不是说单一的只做直播一件事情，然后还会有选品的一些工作，然后还会有一些其他的事情排在里面，其实是没有个人生活的。那我觉得增强粉丝影响力的话，不是说某一件事情。可能今天做了什么事情你就增大了影响力，而是每天不断的内容的输出，粉丝不断的可能对你的了解，慢慢的信任你。
里面有芝麻酱的味道，如果吃不习惯的话就慎买。
A lot of successful live streamers are generally very good at communication. They're very good at articulating very simply what a product does, what a product doesn't do. In order for them to sell, they need to be trustworthy and appear trustworthy, and they need to show in some ways that they're authentic, right? So for Via and Li Jiaqi, they are able to articulate that quite a bit through their body language, through what they say. For example, Li Jiaqi will also sometimes say bad things about certain products, because to him that's his honest opinion, and sometimes people want to hear that. And so they seem very credible, they seem very trustworthy, and don't forget, they're also very entertaining and very interesting. If you're familiar with Li Jiaqi, he won a Guinness record for like the most lipstick applications to models in like 30 seconds. So if you're able to create a lot of buzz with interesting things that you do, people who may not want to buy lipsticks will also stream in just to watch what he does. And then from there, you might get hooked.
这就是一般女生出门的时候涂的口红的颜色。
Live streamers also use sales techniques such as limited time or supply. This sense of scarcity can often encourage viewers to buy.
The platform in itself creates and enhances some of these things, because you see it live. Something we call social proof has taken over, meaning that, hey, other people are interested, other people are joining in, other people want the same product. And they add it in the chat and they ask questions and they say, oh, I want this too. What happens then? It makes the whole product even more scarce.
But it's not just influencers. Local farmers, luxury brands, even mutual funds have also started their own live stream shows.
Working with very top-tier live streamers can be risky. It's not necessary that the benefits will end up with the brand. So we see company executives opening their own shows, and we see like P&G have their own sales room which runs shows every day as well. We also have like local governors in like small towns to sell their agricultural products. So the live streaming is definitely transformed the way product owners can think about how to reach their consumers, and it enables a lot of players to actually sell.
Live stream shopping is going global. Merchants in Southeast Asia have embraced this trend. And in the West, Amazon has upgraded its live streaming function, adding interactive features like chat rooms. Companies, including Google and Facebook, are also developing and investing in technologies to integrate video and e-commerce.
直播电商它其实已经开始成为主流，它未来的发展空间跟潜力都是巨大的。接下来大家会越来越依赖这种购物方式，会变成一个比较日常化、比较规范化的这么一个趋势。
If you look at the numbers alone, their numbers alone, Li Jiaqi's numbers or Via's numbers, you know that they can sell and you know that they can generate revenue. Are they able to sustain it over a long period of time? It depends on how innovative they are at changing some of the things that they do.
But you can't expect consumers one day turn into virtual shopping for good. There will be the nature of us that crave to go into the store, to touch the goods and actually wear it and see how it looks like and walk around in that with our friends. And those things wouldn't be replaceable with live streaming.
Imagine that the oceans are actually the largest battery. We're storing huge amounts of energy in the oceans. The wave motion can be very deep. It can extend down several hundred meters. And once it gets to the near shore, from about 50 meters, the whole water column is moving backwards and forwards.
As we search for ways to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, some are looking to a largely untapped potential source of renewable energy. In theory, waves off the coast of the United States alone could generate over 2 trillion kilowatt hours of electricity a year, enough to power more than half of the country.
waves intensify and subside not as quickly as the wind, and that means that it can produce a smoother power generation curve. One of the potential advantages of wave energy is that it could act as a complementary source of power compared to other renewables on the grid if it were to be scaled up to commercial scale.
For decades, engineers have been trying to convert wave energy into electricity, but a host of technological and financial challenges have complicated their efforts.
In the years from around 2006 to 2015, there were a spate of bankruptcies in the sector, and this was largely because of a lack of kind of continuous proven projects out at sea with reliable electricity generation.
Since then, companies have been trying to develop the technologies at a steadier pace and with a smaller cash burn. But the same questions remain. Can companies develop devices and technologies that actually work? Is wave energy just a novelty or something that can become a major renewable energy source?
The sea is a very challenging environment within which to operate a power project. So seawater is corrosive and conditions are very rough. So this means that power projects don't have a very long lifetime, and it increases operating and maintenance costs.
Partly because of that, many early wave energy projects hit rough waters, such as the Palamas Wave Energy Converter in Portugal and the Isla Limpet project in Scotland. But that hasn't stopped others from trying.
Companies are focused on testing projects out at sea, proving their durability, trying to raise capital and bring down cost. The sector hasn't really converged around one single technology design, and companies are kind of undecided about which design works best.
Finland-based AW Energy is a veteran in the sector. The first proof of concept of the company's device was made in the 90s after diver Rauno Koivusaari observed the strong back-and-forth movement of a hatch cover in a shipwreck in the Baltic Sea.
The waves are generated far from the coastline, so the wind blows on the surface of the water, causing the water particles to rotate, and that rotation extends deep down below the surface, and the waves can be very long. They can be several hundred meters long. And as they come into the near shore, this rotational energy turns into an elliptical energy, and eventually backwards and forwards, as you probably noticed if you've been swimming on the seashore in large waves, you're pulled in and out. That's the energy that we're extracting. There's a sweet spot where we deploy, so around 10 to 15 meters of water depth. That's where there's still strong wave energy coming in.
After years of research, prototyping and testing, the company has deployed Wave Roller, a 350 kilowatt device in the waters of Portugal. Wave Roller has an 18-meter wide and 10-meter high steel panel fixed to the seabed via a floatable foundation. The panel moves back and forth with the waves, capturing the energy.
It's submerged in the depth of 15 meters, so it's protected from the extreme waves. We generate electricity by capturing the movement with hydraulic circuitry in a machine room underneath the surface. That hydraulic energy we turn to electricity with hydraulic accumulators and hydraulic motors, and also a generator.
The Wave Roller has survived large waves at sea for over a year and delivered electricity via an underwater cable to the grid in Portugal. Meanwhile, the company has won a €2.5 million grant to work on an upgraded version of the Wave Roller, aiming to increase the electricity generation capacity to 1 megawatt. The upscaled device would have a bigger panel, 2 power takeoff units, and improved software to control the energy production.
We have taken into use a wave prediction algorithm that kind of tells us what kind of waves are coming into our device. That gives us few seconds to prepare for capturing more energy, and the difference in that is significant.
Our future plans are to deliver technology around the world. So I'm hoping we can be working on delivering technology to projects in Asia and also in the American continent as well.
Meanwhile, Israeli company Eco Wave Power is taking a different approach to capturing the power of the ocean. For the company's founder, Inna Braverman, developing new sources of renewable energy is a personal mission.
I was born in Ukraine in 1986, and 2 weeks after I was born, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, causing the largest in history nuclear disaster. I was one of the babies that got hurt from the negative effects of such explosion. I had a respiratory arrest and a clinical death. Luckily, my mother, a nurse, approached my crib on time and gave me a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which saved my life. I got a second chance in life and decided to do something good with it.
Growing up, Inna wanted to be a politician to positively change the world. After working as a translator at a renewable energy company, she decided to change paths.
Solar and wind energy were fully commercialized. There were a lot of amazing technologies implemented everywhere. I saw that wave energy, although it's an immense source of electricity, the biggest companies in the world are trying to develop wave energy with no success. And there was kind of a race going on in the world of who is the company that is going to develop a viable wave energy solution first.
In 2011, the then 24-year-old Inna co-founded Eco Wave Power. Instead of installing devices offshore, the company's devices are attached to existing breakwaters, jetties, and piers.
Our technology is very cost efficient, especially in comparison to the offshore technologies, because we don't need any ships, divers, underwater mooring or cables. We install on existing man-made structures, and all our expensive equipment, the generator, the hydraulic conversion unit, the automation, is located on land just like a regular power station. This is the EcoWave Power conversion unit that has been operating in Jaffa Port since 2014 until 2020. Here you can see how the technology works. Basically, the floaters are going up and down and pushing the hydro cylinders, which transmit biodegradable fluid into land-located accumulators. A pressure is being built. The higher the waves, the higher the pressure, which is used to turn the hydro motor, which is turning the generators. The whole system is controlled by a smart automation system, which you can see right here. And in case of upcoming storms, the system automatically raises the floater above the water level and keeps them in the upward position until the storm passes.
The company has been operating a 100-kilowatt grid-connected device in Gibraltar since 2016, which is enough to power 100 households. Currently, Inna and her team are working on another 100-kilowatt project at the port of Jaffa in Tel Aviv.
The project will be also the first time in the history of Israel that wave energy will officially connect to the electrical grid. And our goal going forward is to expand it to all suitable breakwaters in the city of Tel Aviv and to supply a significant part of the city's electricity needs.
Today, engineers and entrepreneurs are still trying to crack wave energy. Globally, only a few hundred kilowatts of wave energy are deployed, compared with gigawatts of offshore wind. But the field has come a long way in recent years, and with the right engineering solutions, this new power source could eventually become competitive with more mature renewables like solar and wind.
I would have a lot more confidence in the success of wave energy companies today as opposed to like 20 years ago. But in the next few years, or maybe the next couple of decades, it will be more likely to be used in remote locations like islands that are otherwise dependent on expensive diesel power, or out at sea on gas decommissioning rigs, or for powering underwater autonomous vehicles.
So definitely, wave energy can compete with other renewable energy sources, but I personally believe that this is not a competition. In order to have a 100% renewable energy friendly world, we need all renewable energy sources to work together.
So can you please tell me? I'm not going to... please wait.
You know, I've covered a lot of companies. I've covered a lot of Machiavellian companies where, you know, people play rough. I don't think I've ever seen anything on the scale of Nissan.
He is making you, but you act from this side. I mean, it's corrupt. The system is...
One of the most dramatic elements was Ravinder Passi's home being raided by court officials in Yokohama.
You scared my wife. You scared my children. I worked in this for 16 years.
So Rav Passi's journey into the darkest recesses of the Japanese corporate world started when he was the general counsel, the highest corporate lawyer position in the company.
In the past few minutes, Nissan has revealed that its chairman has been arrested after allegations of serious misconduct.
He was tasked with investigating Carlos Ghosn. And he was told, conduct an internal investigation and get to the heart of the matter. And then along the way, he started to notice serious conflicts of interest.
He is one of the few people who knows an extreme amount of detail regarding the alleged crimes by Carlos Ghosn, and he's now ready to tell his own story on the record about some of the events that happened.
My name is Ravinder Passi. I'm the former Global General Counsel of Nissan Motor Co. Limited. And you could say, yes, I had a front row seat in terms of what was going on.
When Carlos Ghosn saved Nissan years ago, he was depicted in Japanese comic books as this hero, and now maybe we'll see comic books where he's the villain.
In corporate Japan, Nissan was quite an unusual company. It was led for 2 decades by a non-Japanese executive.
Well, Carlos Ghosn was a hero in the Japanese business world. If you had a global business celebrity in Japan and worldwide, it was definitely Carlos Ghosn.
In a country with few foreigners at the top, he stood out. But over the years, he saved Nissan from bankruptcy, allied with Renault and Mitsubishi, and turned the alliance into one of the most competitive in the world.
Yet as the years went on, you know, I think his ambitions changed a little bit. He started thinking about legacy plays, and one of them was to really tighten the alliance between Renault and Japan. And unbeknownst to him, there was a contingent of senior Nissan executives that were really felt threatened by that move. They really thought that they would lose complete control of the car company, and even in the government, there was probably a little bit of anxiety about a national champion in the auto industry falling under full-blown foreign control.
Carlos Ghosn was an auto industry leader, respected by many in Japan. Now he's in jail.
The arrest of Carlos Ghosn came completely out of the blue. This was in November of 2018. He was coming to Japan on Nissan's corporate jet for a regular executive meeting, and he was met on the tarmac by Japanese authorities who whisked him away to jail and charged him with financial misconduct crimes.
So what happened was that a power struggle ensued inside the company, and somewhere along the way, it was criminalized. By that I mean that there were allegations leveled at Carlos Ghosn about the way he reported his pay to Japanese authorities, the way he handled money inside the company, that in other contexts might have been a board action, might have been handled internally. A number of executives at Nissan decided to take this difference and take it over to the Tokyo prosecutor's office, and that unleashed a chain of events that would shake the entire auto industry.
So after Carlos Ghosn was arrested, Nissan launched an internal investigation into the events that led up to his arrest.
So Rav Passi was tasked with investigating Carlos Ghosn, and he was told, get to the heart of the matter, find out what Carlos Ghosn did wrong and bring it to our shareholders.
It's really complicated because you had various things coming out of the weeds. 2018, the investigation has started, and we become aware of matters in terms of conflicts, actions by certain individuals that cause some concern because things might not quite be what they seem.
So in our story, we really took a close look at Harinada and his role in Carlos Ghosn's downfall.
Harinada is one of the most fascinating figures inside Nissan. He's also a lawyer. He's originally Malaysian. Hello, Mr. Hari. And he had a meteoric rise through the company and became very, very close to Carlos Ghosn and other top figures. He had a front row seat at all the major strategic deliberations at the company. And when he discovered that Carlos Ghosn, as his final legacy play, was going to tighten the relationship between Renault and Nissan, he made a decision to go against Carlos Ghosn. And he became one of the key figures that decided that Carlos Ghosn had to go.
Harinada was somebody who actually recruited me into the company, so I have a long-standing relationship with him, or did have a long-standing relationship with him. For many, many years, he was a mentor. I had doubts about the credibility of the process right at the start. Harinada had a plea deal with the Tokyo prosecutors. Now, that suggests he was intrinsically involved in some of the wrongdoing, or the allegations of wrongdoing, and it just didn't smell right, just doesn't sit right.
So there was a basic conflict of interest. In other words, Harinada had to deliver results to Japanese prosecutors to avoid his own criminal liability, and he's accusing and leading the investigation of Carlos Ghosn.
Some of the people who had been involved in the original alleged crimes were also looking into the affairs themselves. Ravinder Passi began pointing out some of these conflict of interest issues. And the reason for that is essentially his concern was for the company. If the company's own investigation into itself was compromised, that could lead to a very weak position in various lawsuits that it was dealing with across the world.
I had discussions with Harry, discussions with the statutory auditors about these conflicts, discussions with HR about some of these conflicts, because at that point, we reported into him. You know, at the time, everything was quite, as you can imagine, it was, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to move fast. But when you step back and look at some of these things, you just think, my God, what was going on here? Because me, members of my team, were being placed in immediate danger. Your chairman's been arrested, a representative director's been arrested. They both happen to be foreigners. And then now what we need to do, we're being instructed to do, is certain compliance professionals need to go into properties in Brazil, for example, and retrieve evidence. They've got to do it very carefully, because if they don't do it carefully, they're going to get convicted of criminal activities. And likewise, when a team of lawyers were commissioned to go to Lebanon, I mean, one of my immediate concerns was, why are lawyers from Nissan being sent to go to Lebanon to retrieve evidence? These are just lawyers, they're corporate lawyers from Nissan. You had revelations that a number of executives had benefited from share appreciation rights when they shouldn't have. I mean, you know, substantive amounts of money being taken by these guys when they weren't entitled to take them. And you do think, yes, how is this going to look later on? It's going to look quite concerning. So that triggered for me the sort of assessment that, well, I'm going to have to do something, because up until this point, I haven't put down on paper these conflicts and these issues.
So Rav Pasi makes a fateful move. He writes this letter to the board listing every suspicion he has in great detail, backed up by evidence, backed up by memos, of why this internal investigation had serious problems. He sends the letter to the board and it's crickets. He doesn't hear much of anything.
Nothing happened thereafter. Nothing at all. Just like it just gone into a black box.
And he began to suspect that there was a desire, even at the highest level within Nissan, to kind of sweep these conflicts of interest under the rug.
Unfortunately for me, I think, again, with hindsight, people must have thought that this is the nail that's sticking out, and we can't have this. Within 3 days of me submitting that to the board of directors, that letter to the independent board of directors, I was removed from the Goan Executive Conduct Matters. I was then told that I could not attend board meetings anymore. And up until that point, I had attended every single board meeting. I was then also told that after 8 years of being in Japan, I'd be going back to the UK. It eventually transpired that I'd be the VP of Projects and Transformation, managing a team of 3. So you can imagine what this feels like at this stage. Almost an arbitrary removal from Japan, where I've lived for 8 years, had 3 children there, my family has grown up, and we've been settled there, having a few months earlier been promoted to vice president at a global level, to being almost demoted.
So Pasi was essentially being reassigned to get him as far away from the internal investigation as possible, and also to a certain extent in retaliation to some of the issues that he brought up regarding the internal investigation and Harinada.
What happened to Rav Pasi can be seen as a series of corporate humiliations. I mean, first of all, his immediate responsibilities were taken away from him. Eventually, he lost, the coveted general counsel title. But it didn't stop there. Toward the end of his stay in Japan, Rav and his wife were convinced that they were being followed.
During that period, I'd noticed that whilst driving my car, I'd have other cars following me. First time I noticed this was around mid-March, and I was driving, I can't remember where I was going, but this grey van, small van, just literally started following me. And I noticed that there was somebody in the car taking pictures. And lo and behold, we were absolutely being followed either by people on foot or other individuals, 2 or 3, normally 2 burly men in a car, different cars at different times, following us around. They were following the family as well. And, given I'd seen the Nissan security department behave in a very, very egregious manner with others in terms of following and surveilling, I was very concerned as to what they were doing and who they were giving this information to. Because if they're giving this information to the authorities, you do think, why? What's going on here? I mean, this is just not normal behavior.
And this all culminated in a rather dramatic event in the middle of 2020.
Who are you people?
Where Nissan had hired a legal team and had obtained an unusual court order from the district court in Yokohama
to basically do a search of his home and seizure of his corporate laptop and phone and other documents.
If you don't let us in now, we have to break this key.
So it's a pretty extreme way to treat someone who had spent 16 years at the company.
These people have all come in. We don't really know who they are, apart from the fact that I've been shown a badge that says the Yokohama Court. And they're here to recover a laptop and a mobile phone. It was even more weird because I'd highlighted to the directors that certain Nissan executives were trying to recover this laptop and this phone whilst I was still in Japan. And I was very concerned because it had evidence on there that related to misconduct matters and other forms of inappropriate conduct. It was just another form of intimidation, another form of harassment, forcing me almost to leave the company and the country. Because once they'd retained and obtained these items, we were still followed, which, again, I just couldn't understand. What is the point of doing that? You know, this is a car company. This is not the KGB.
I think it's fair to say that Rav Pasi didn't have full battlefield awareness of all the intrigue going on at Nissan. I mean, Harinata is interesting because he's both charismatic and charming, and one of the most brutal corporate infighters one could ever run across.
This is a confidential company email, right? You should not have this.
If he had fallen into line, he would probably still have his job at Nissan, be paid very well, and continued his work.
A career that he spent 16 years building at Nissan is irretrievably broken. It's been smashed to smithereens. He and his family paid a huge price, certainly. But in terms of being able to sleep at night, I think he's come out ahead.
I highlighted issues to the highest levels of the company so that they could be dealt with appropriately by those in charge. There was no response to those, and there was retaliation against me. What's really profound, like absolutely profound, is that none of your colleagues, I mean people who you have known for years, forget it.
Yeah.
You're on your own.
Yeah.
And you got to be ready for that. You've got to be ready for that. If you take it on anyway.
This is the awful truth. There's always someone in the family that's pushing it.
This lady does not deserve to be taken advantage of, especially at your age with your own grandchild.
Yeah.
My grandma is having to sue them. I'm testifying against them. Nobody's talking. They're one floor below right now. I get afraid to go on the elevator. It's sad that it had to devolve to this.
It's like a soap opera to me.
It's a very sad thing.
It's a family feud. A family feud.
Here's a family that, on paper, you would think has the wealth that so many people seek, yet at the end of the day, it seemed to sort of rip everybody apart. My name's Tom Schoenberg. I'm a senior reporter here at Bloomberg News, cover financial enforcement. I was approached by someone close to the Schottenstein family and asked whether or not I would be interested in writing about Beverly Schottenstein and this case that she had against J.P. Morgan. And it was immediately clear that there was a great story here to be told. So I started just, assembling all sorts of documents that the family made available to me. That included a diary that Beverly had begun writing when she started having suspicions about what was actually going on with her money. Beverly obtained her wealth from the Schottenstein kind of retail empire that has at times included Big Lots, Value City, American Eagle Outfitters, DSW Shoes. Beverly's husband died, and at which point they sold off their portion of the company, bringing them an enormous amount of wealth at around 1990. Estimates of her wealth were around $90 million. She, for many years, had that pool of money being managed by outside advisors. Her grandsons in the late 2000s had both graduated and were becoming financial advisors. She gave them a little bit to work with, and over time, her grandson, Evan, became the trustee of her entire estate. Managing sort of family money is not a conflict. In fact, some ways in wealth management, it's kind of how you get your start. It's kind of the seed that you need to sort of get going in the business. But Beverly started having suspicions that something was wrong probably in around 2016.
Well, there were suspicious things, but taken separately without everyone talking about their own experiences, it was hard to really put it together.
She had written a check to her caretaker, Dawn, that bounced. So she went down to her local Chase branch to sort of find out what was going on. She wasn't getting paper statements in the mail, so she asked them to print out a number of her statements having to do with her checking account and her credit card account.
So we went to the bank and asked for the statements. And she got a whole year and going through all of them, page by page by page.
And it was there she saw all sorts of charges that she said she didn't authorize or didn't know about.
I was becoming very, very suspicious. I was starting to look in the money part, and that's what bothered me more when I saw that money was going. And I was not a big spender.
Around the same time, Dawn, she starts noticing Beverly's son, who lived in the condominium below her, came up with Evan with a shredder and started grabbing papers in her office area, including some with J.P. Morgan letterhead, and just started sitting at the kitchen table, just shredding documents over and over.
Yeah, they came in one morning.
They used to do it in the back.
Through the back door, and they brought the shredder inside. And then they went in the drawers in the office and took out all the papers, and they started doing it. I was very suspicious because I know you don't go around and destroying papers.
Beverly said that they had done this many times before.
That's when she said to me, you know, Dawn, I'm going to write my feelings in this black book.
Diary.
And it's a diary, and she started writing. Each day she would write a little at a time.
Around the holidays of 2018, a package had arrived, a FedEx package, and in it were materials about a venture capital fund based out of the Cayman Islands. Dawn and some other family members take a look at this, and they see that Beverly is signed up for this fund to the tune of $5 million over the course of several years.
And that was really the beginning of it. That was sort of the tip of the iceberg when it became obvious that something was going on, that my grandmother really wasn't aware of this fund.
You know, Beverly started to panic. She got really upset and called, J.P. Morgan's headquarters in New York and asked for Jamie Dimon. She said she was told someone would call her back, but she says that never happened. She wrote a letter to Evan and Avi, and in there she laid out a number of things that were concerning her: unauthorized trading, the checking account. She had about $1 million worth of jewelry in a safe deposit box, and that her son Bobby had the key to that box, and that jewelry had gone missing. All this was kind of packaged in this, 5-page handwritten amendment to a will and trust.
There's such an evolving narrative about why the jewelry was taken. The only truth we really know is that the jewelry is gone. But why it happened, there have been a lot of different stories.
You just don't take your mother's wonderful things and hand it out.
And they emailed that note to J.P. Morgan to seize all activity on her account.
And it ended up setting off a firestorm after that. As soon as they got this email that there was a cease and desist and that she wanted to send her money and change brokerage firms, they were actually vacationing one floor below downstairs. They're there right now.
The next day, Beverly's in her place. The granddaughter's still in her place visiting. Dawn is there, and up comes Bobby kind of barging through the door. And he's screaming about what was sent to the J.P. Morgan. They're now investigating them. And he's furious, takes his mother and sort of puts her into a chair, gets pen and paper, and she says physically forced her to write a retraction letter.
They were pushing me around.
It was a scary time. I was really afraid, too.
I had to take her to the doctor, and she did an x-ray because she was in so much pain.
The locks had to be changed. The phone number had to be changed. I really thought we were going to have to hire guards to be outside just for protection.
Oh, it was terrible.
Horrible scene.
Beverly brought her case before the Financial Industry Regulatory Authorities, usually known as FINRA. It took several months of hearings. She sees all sorts of transactions that's going on, hundreds of them that she claims that she never knew about, never authorized, but yet were logged in J.P. Morgan's files as having been direct requests from her. That included the sale of a large amount of Apple stock worth several $1 million, as well as all her stock in Big Lots. Over the course of their time with J.P. Morgan, Evan and Avi were making all sorts of trading on her account that was generating millions of dollars in commissions for themselves and the bank, yet she was not sort of getting any of the type of gains that you would expect sort of an $80 million account in a bullish market to be able to get. They issued a ruling entirely in her favor, finding that her grandsons, as well as J.P. Morgan, they were liable for violating their fiduciary duty, misrepresenting themselves, and they also found that the bank and her grandson, Evan, were liable for elder abuse. Evan and Avi, they were fired from J.P. Morgan. They issued an award of about $19 million. I reached out for comment, and J.P. Morgan emphasized that Evan and Avi were no longer with the firm and that their actions do not represent the sort of values of the bank. I reached out to Evan and Avi, heard back from their lawyer saying that, they disagree with the law and the facts that FINRA kind of used to decide the case against them and are seeing if they can have it withdrawn. Her son, Bobby, wrote her a letter, said his sons weren't criminals, and he also admits to taking her jewelry. And he says he needed it to pay off some bad business debts he had.
They never once came up to say, I'm sorry.
If there had been an apology and some acceptance, and asking for forgiveness from my grandmother, I don't think we'd be in the position that we are now.
Since the piece came out, we've received dozens of messages from people, many of whom are telling their own sort of personal tales of, kind of financial advisors gone bad, or family members who got control of an estate and abused, those within. It seems that it's really resonated with a lot of people. I keep, hearing a lot of feedback about Beverly and how, a lot of people feel she did the right thing.
You're never too old to stand up for yourself and try to right an injustice. She was adamant that she wanted to stand up for herself, but at the end of the day, they did wrong.
It's a painful life lesson. Beverly taught them that you don't mess with grandma.
On April 20th, oil markets did something they never had before, and they crashed, went into negative territory and closed the day at minus $40. Meanwhile, in a place called Thaden Boyce in Essex, a group of 9 traders, led by a guy called Cuddles, made $660 million over the course of a couple of hours.
The price of oil has collapsed to a record low.
We've never really seen anything like it. WTI this morning down more than 35%.
People maybe wouldn't have been so surprised if the oil price had fallen to zero, but the oil price went to minus 38. It went far lower than anyone had expected. And so lots of people in the market were saying, well, hang on, something else is going on here.
A couple of months later, I started to get wind through a kind of network of sources that a tiny firm in the outskirts of London had made a huge amount of money that day and potentially had some part to play in what happened.
The information we got was that 9 traders at Vega Capital London had made in the region of $660 million in one day. As a group, I think they made as much money in one day as Apple makes from its international sales in one day. I mean, it's an insane sum of money.
Did they pull off a fantastic trade? Did they predict the way the market was moving and get it absolutely right? Or was there something else going on, and had they actually done something that breached market rules in a bid to sort of push the market? And that investigation is ongoing. So Paul Commins is a trader who cut his teeth in the pits in the 80s and 90s. When everyone had a nickname, his was Cuddles. If you can imagine, that was a very sort of cutthroat type of world where people are doing, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars trades by shouting at each other, giving hand signals, and then sort of scrawling on scraps of paper.
The culture of the trading pits in London was very influenced by the working class guys who became traders there. They weren't like the city bankers that had gone before them. They weren't usually Oxford or Cambridge. They didn't wear Savile Row suits. They were ordinary working guys who happened to have a talent for trading. And a lot of them came from Essex.
I think it was 400 traders in the pits, and Cuddles in his oil and gas pit was described to us as amongst the top 3 amongst that, was very successful and made very large amounts of money as a young man. But inevitably mechanization and the arrival of electronic markets was the kind of death knell for the pits, and in 2005 the IPE closed down.
And when the pits shut down, a lot of the traders who worked there lost their jobs or quit or went to work for financial institutions. But Paul Commins decided to start his own trading collective out in Essex.
Some of them are ex-pit guys, cut from the same cloth as him. Lots of them are actually sort of in their 20s, and they're his, drinking buddy's son, or they're his own kids' friends from football. They're young lads, hungry and ambitious, and he brings them into the fold. And fairly shortly, he's got, maybe a dozen or so traders that they're independent, let's be clear, but they're all part of this collective.
Yeah, I'll let Liam deal with Essex.
I am from Essex, so I feel like I'm free to, to get into this.
Sweet, as they say.
If you were to ask someone in Britain how they would imagine a kind of Essex person, they would see someone who's maybe slightly flamboyant, with a sort of Cockney accent, a sort of Guy Ritchie-style accent. Not afraid to splash the cash, but it's probably pretty bright and has done well for themselves.
Don't even make sense, does it?
But, these guys, they drove around very nice Rolls Royces and Bentleys. They went to places like Marbella on holiday.
Faden Boyce is a very wealthy place. You have to have considerable income to be able to afford to live in that village. It's a really nice place to live, and it's 20 minutes tube ride away from the city.
Earlier in the summer, we have this lead, which is that there's this tiny firm called Vega Capital London, and they were the biggest winners from the biggest oil crash in history. Anyone that covers markets is going to be surprised about that. You're thinking your BPs of the world or your Glencores, but there's this tiny firm.
And one of the big challenges that we had was actually finding out who worked with Vega Capital. It wasn't immediately obvious, and at first we had absolutely no idea. If you go to the Vega Capital website, it says it's under construction. If you do basic online searching, it's very difficult to find anyone who's publicly connected to the company.
So inevitably, we're incredibly curious at this point. Like, who the hell are these people?
The more reporting we did, the more it became clear that this group were connected socially as well as professionally. They went to weddings together, they played golf together, they would go on holiday together. We found out that a number of them were members of the West Ham Supporters Club in London. A few of them started companies together, so you could see all the connections between them and start to see a distinct group emerging.
And it really just was this kind of shock that, this wasn't just like a hedge fund or a firm you'd never heard of. This was actually a group of buddies who all had the same experience on this day and had all made a huge amount of money. So if you're an oil trader, there's a number of different ways you can trade, and probably the most popular is WTI futures contracts.
And it's basically a contract that says, I'm going to buy 1,000 barrels of oil from you at this point in the future, or I'm going to sell 1,000 barrels of oil to you at this point in the future.
It's actually just a financial contract to gamble on to predict whether oil is going to go up or down.
On the 20th of April in Essex, there had been signals for a while that this was going to be an exceptional day in oil markets. And we know that some of them arose early and started their trading in the early hours of the morning while it was still dark outside.
Essentially what they were doing is buying contracts that gave them an obligation to buy oil at whatever the price ended up at 2:30 p.m. So they're basically placing a bet that oil was going to fall throughout the day.
But they're simultaneously selling lots of oil as well. And whether they make a profit and how much profit they make is the difference between what they buy the oil for and what they sell the oil for. Now, of course, we now know throughout April 20th, the price dropped and dropped.
So this is going very well for them. They are committed to selling oil at these prices, and the prices are continuing to fall, which means they're going to be able to offset it and buy oil at cheaper at the end of the day. Now, once it gets to kind of 1:30, 2 p.m., that's when things start to get really interesting. Suddenly there's a kind of influx of buyers and sellers, as desperation increases in the market and trading volumes go up. Now at 2:08 p.m. exactly, something bizarre and unprecedented happened, which is that oil passes into negative territory.
And it fell to a record level of minus $38.
We've never seen anything like it, period, in terms of the contraction of the global economy.
That huge gulf between what they were buying the oil for and what they were selling it for enabled them to make more money than they ever thought possible.
So their profit was the difference between, minus 37, and all of these positive numbers on every contract they sold.
The price of crude briefly hit minus $37 a barrel. For one group of traders operating from a small office, it was a very, very profitable day.
It's important to remember this had never happened before in the history of oil trading. No one could have predicted it.
I can't think of another example of where you enter a trade and you get paid on both sides. You get paid both to sell and to buy. It's unthinkable.
One thing we know about the Cuddles Trading Arcade is that they were very comfortable taking large risks. And, you have to be clear, this was a large risk.
Yeah, we spoke to oil traders, both people that know these guys and people that don't, and they all say that this is, incredibly risky.
And that's actually what stops a lot of oil traders doing trading like this. They simply aren't willing to stomach the risk. But Cuddles and his friends were.
So when the kind of final calculations came down, the group of the 9 most profitable traders made $660 million or thereabouts between them. I mean, if you can imagine, I think 3 or 4 of them made in excess of 100 million each.
One of the astonishing things about this trade is that 2 of the individuals who made more than $100 million in a single day were in their 20s. One of them was 22 years old. Only a few years earlier, he'd been posting on his social media about doing teenage stuff with his mates in town and going to see girls and rap music. And here he is a few years later making $100 million in a single day's trading. When me and Liam discovered that, we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. Oil trading is a zero-sum game. Anytime you're making money as an oil trader, someone else is losing it.
Amongst the biggest losers were the investors in this Chinese fund, Crude Oil Treasure Fund. There were thousands of them, and they lost everything.
Lots of people had put their savings into oil funds. They lost money that day. Big banks and brokers who sort of stand in the middle of trading parties, they lost money that day.
And another interesting thing is that oil-producing countries like Kuwait or Canada, they sell oil as an average of the WTI closing price over the preceding month. So the fact that one of those numbers in that average was minus 37 meant, if you can imagine, countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait potentially lost a couple of dollars on every single barrel of oil they sold that month.
Vega Capital's traders made such an extraordinary sum of money that it was inevitable there would be some scrutiny of what they did. But it wasn't just the sums of money they made. In the vital half an hour before the settlement price was set, they were by far the biggest sellers of oil futures in the market, which is an incredible thing to think about when you consider that the other participants in that oil market are going to be the world's biggest banks, oil majors, BP and Shell, and here you have a group of 9 guys in Essex who are having this significant influence over a global market for oil.
I mean, I think you have to assume that if these guys had made $7 million or $10 million, they probably would be celebrating in Essex right now. But the fact that they made closer to $700 million has meant that they are facing understandable scrutiny.
We wrote individually to all the Vega traders who did exceptionally well that day, and we got a letter in response from a law firm representing the group. The law firm was at pains to point out, number one, that they haven't been accused of any wrongdoing, that they all traded independently and separately, and they'd basically all made up their own minds that this was what was going to happen in oil markets based on publicly available knowledge, and decided to execute this trade.
What I love about these stories is there's a real variance of opinion, and some people will look at what happened and think that must be dodgy. They all traded at the end of the day. They all made a huge amount of money while all these people lost. That's shocking. But lots of people say these guys are at acute disadvantage. They're in a market that's inhabited by, huge technology-driven funds and firms and oil giants that have got all the advantages in the world, and when you get a bunch of Essex geezers who essentially beat the market and find a way to make a huge amount of money, they should get a pat on the back, really, because that's the dream. Since this happened, a lot of the guys have stopped trading the monthly settlements that they'd done so well at in the past. Several of them have set up new companies. They've essentially gone very quiet. Any kind of social media presence they had is kind of closed down. By all accounts, they're, waiting this out.
It's certainly too early to try and predict how the regulatory investigations are going to pan out. We just don't know. There's a number of potential outcomes for these guys. Potential punishments if there are any findings of manipulation against Vega or anyone affiliated with it might be you could be fined, you could be banned from trading, and in the most extreme cases there have even been criminal prosecutions in the past of people who have been found to have been manipulating the settlement and misconduct related to trade at settlement. There are other outcomes too. One obvious one is going to be that they're able to walk away from this life-changing trade with all the money that they made and celebrated as heroes in the trading community. That they'll go down as legends.
It's very important, given the nature of the climate crisis right now, for the general public to have an understanding of what progress is or is not actually happening. And I think many readers right now, they'll see these hundreds and hundreds of companies making these big, bold climate claims. And they would be forgiven to think that we're well on our way to meeting the emission reduction trajectory we need to be on. And the reality of the matter is we're just not on that trajectory. And a key reason for this sort of disconnect is the use of offsets that aren't doing what they claim to be doing.
We have a massive potential for sort of willful blindness. We can convince ourselves of things regardless of what the facts are. And so that's what tends to happen in these cases. It's not that anybody is setting out to commit climate fraud. They sort of walk themselves into a situation and they convince themselves of one thing, and that allows them to convince themselves of another thing. But at the end of the day, they're doing something that makes no sense at all.
My name is Ben Elgin. I wrote the story about how the billion-dollar market for carbon offsets is setting back the fight against climate change. So one of the challenges in reporting on carbon offsets and trying to figure out what's going on is really finding good experts who have been steeped in this marketplace and are willing to candidly talk about it. One of the best people for this is a fellow named Mark Trexler, and I've been talking to him for more than a decade.
My name is Mark Trexler. I've worked in climate change for the last 30 years. I was actually hired by the World Resources Institute in Washington to work on the first carbon offset project in 1988. In terms of defining a carbon offset, one of the beauties, so to speak, of greenhouse gases, sort of the silver lining of greenhouse gases, when you put up a molecule of CO2 into the atmosphere, it can be anywhere in the planet in 7 days. And therefore, if there's an option to reduce emissions on the other side of the planet, and you can do that very cheaply as compared to doing it in your factory, for example, then why not pay that person, that factory on the other side of the planet to reduce their emissions? Then you are, in a sense, offsetting your emissions, and the atmosphere doesn't really see your emissions anymore.
So carbon offsets have been around for quite some time, and they were actually key with these international climate agreements, such as the Kyoto Protocol, which mandated the wealthiest countries reduce their greenhouse gas emissions.
The treaty was signed on the 11th of December, 1997.
Decided. The business community in general saw carbon offsets as a huge opportunity to comply with whatever
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Less than an hour to go until the latest Fed decision. 2 o'clock Wall Street time. Kate Moore is head of thematic strategy at BlackRock Financial Management.
There is very little room, I think, for the Fed to sound dovish today during the meeting. The data is all suggesting they should continue on the path. I think the big surprise would be if they are even more hawkish than the hawkish expectations. And I think that wouldn't be received very well by risk assets, and particularly by equity markets. But if we had anything less than 75 basis points, there would be a lot of head scratching. I think we're all in that same camp.
Complete coverage coming up here on Bloomberg Radio. S&P up 19, now up 0.5%. The Dow up 106, up 0.4. NASDAQ up 51, a gain there of 0.5. The 2-year yield 4.01%. 10-year 3.57%. Gold at $16.65 the ounce. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash, now a special edition of Bloomberg Business Week, live from the Plaza Hotel with Carol Masser and Tim Stanovic.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. And yes, indeed, this is a special edition of Bloomberg Radio, and we are live on Bloomberg Radio as well as on YouTube. But we are here at the Plaza in New York City. A lot going on because of the UN General Assembly, and a big part of it is an event here today hosted by Bloomberg Philanthropies along with the Earthshot Prize. And this is all about solutions really focusing on our environment, our climate, and just many people involved in it, from government officials to business professionals, entrepreneurs, investors, you name it.
Yeah, we got philanthropists, business executives, grassroots climate activists from all over the world. What they're doing is spotlighting emerging, systems-changing solutions and showcasing the critical need to turbocharge groundbreaking climate innovations to address the world's most pressing environmental challenges.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a lot about timelines and deadlines, and many people saying we don't have a lot of years left before that this is really, you can't reverse the impact that climate change has had on our environment. Well, earlier I got to catch up with the CEO of the Earthshot Prize. She is Hannah Jones, to talk about the work that they are doing. They nominate finalists, they nominate winners, and they really help them scale up their solutions. Behind the Earthshot Prize is none other than Prince William of the UK. Listen to this interview.
The energy, by the way, in this place is off the charts, which is exactly what we need this week. We need urgent optimism, and we need people feeling totally energized by the possibility. And that really takes me back to our founder, Prince William. He founded the Earthshot Prize after having 2 insights. He was in a conservation project that was really successful in Namibia, but he felt terribly frustrated that this successful solution wasn't going to scale, and it wasn't going to be replicated around the world. And yet, it was helping poachers become conservationists, it was changing the entire landscape, so why wasn't anyone scaling it? His second insight was that the dialogue at the time, back in 2019, was so full of fear and anger that he was worried that we wouldn't get to action and change if we didn't inject optimism into the conversation. So he married those 2 insights, and he created the Earthshot Prize. And the Earthshot Prize is meant to be a beacon for urgent optimism and putting the spotlight on solutions that, if scaled, could repair and regenerate the planet.
And you've got 5 different categories. Talk to me a little bit about that.
We do. So we did a lot of research into how we should do this, and we've set up 5 Earthshot challenges. One is oceans, which, by the way, I'm so in love with the innovation happening in oceans.
Me too.
One is in biodiversity. One is around waste, clean air, and climate change. And if you think about it, all of those things are the things that we need to see repaired and restored and regenerated for the Earth to be livable, equitable, sustainable. So we award £1 million each to a winner in each of the categories each year. But Prince William is very clear with us, the team. We're going to have 15 finalists as a whole, and they are our family, and we are here to support them all, irrespective of who ultimately wins the big money. And we see the money as catalytic. So we have this incredible partnership and collective of partners, of which Bloomberg Philanthropies is obviously a key one. And so when we bring the finalists out into the spotlight, we're also looking at how we can give them access to talent, access to advice, access to networks of power, and ultimately to blended capital. Because we want them to go from being a great working prototype that, if they were scaled, could make a huge impact. Let's do that fast, everybody.
Hannah, you know, what was interesting too is you guys reached out around the globe, right? People were nominated, a lot that you had to go through. What was it that made somebody stand out that you said, I want these people to be a finalist and then ultimately a winner?
It's a great question, and it's the hardest part of our job. We have a prize council that are made up of some incredible people. Christiana Figueres, we have Hindu Ibrahim, we have Sir David Attenborough, the Prince. The list goes on, Queen Rania, and they have to actually get to a place where they have to make the final 5. Let me tell you, this is a terrible conversation.
I can imagine.
But before there, we have a very rigorous process. So we have official nominators that bring in nominations every year, and from that, we're looking for, first of all, are these diverse? Do they represent really all of the countries in the world? Do they bring women to the fore? Do they bring indigenous communities to the fore? How do we make sure that we have representation? Secondly, I think, do they have the potential to make an impact? So right now they're a working prototype, but how are they going to impact if they went to scale carbon or biodiversity or sustainable livelihood creation? How will they make an impact? And do we see a pathway to helping them? And if so, they get to the next stage, which is how can they inspire the world? And really, that's a very complicated process. We have technical experts. We really bring in, we have an external group that helps us, Deloitte.
Right.
So that we make sure it's fair, objective, and consistent.
One thing I wanted to ask you is I do feel like there's a lot of momentum, certainly in the investment world when it comes to the ESG space, right? A lot of money going into sustainability, environment. What is it that sets you guys apart with what you're doing at Earthshot?
Well, you know, there's not a day when I don't meet with a philanthropist or a VC, with an ESG fund or an impact investor. And after an initial conversation, they look at me and say, can I tell you a secret? Could you be my deal pipeline? I don't have enough things that I know what to invest in.
Interesting.
Now, we are sitting on this incredible, we've got already over 2,000 nominations just in 18 months. And we're vetting, you know, to get through a different stage. We're looking at them and we're saying, but how can we matchmake? How can we matchmake our eco-innovators with blended capital?
Which is incredible, because talking to some of your finalists, they say there's a lot of things, having a seat at the table, but capital is crucial for scale, and scalability.
Imagine that you are any one of these finalists or innovators. You're not walking down Sands Hill Road and bumping into a VC every day.
Right.
You're living in Nigeria thinking of how you do a low-cost solar leasing program to help people in the local slums to have access to green electricity. But you need funding, but you have no access to those networks of privilege.
Right.
Prince William was very clear. I want to use my privilege and my platform to convene and make that funding conversation happen faster. But having worked so much with entrepreneurs, what I'll also tell you this, when you go on that journey from being a prototype to being scale, you don't just need money.
Right.
You need advice. You need support. You need compassion and kindness. You need leadership training, storytelling training. So that's something that we're also really supporting. And our Global Alliance of Partners, they're not just putting capital in, they're putting staff in. They're putting expertise in. They're opening up their supply chains.
You know, and what's interesting is, you know, when we think about the world of venture capitalists and entrepreneurs, they're all doing some really cool things, but we're talking literally about saving the world, saving the planet. Earthshot, we talk about moonshots, right? Like doing the unthinkable. This is about existence for everyone. And that's why you talk about oceans and earth and energy. I mean, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, one of the things to think about is this is the 60th anniversary of the moonshot. And Prince William was really influenced by President Kennedy's moonshot challenge to the American people because it did two things. He didn't just challenge them to land a man on the moon and bring them home safely when we knew none of the answers to how to do that. What actually happened was it unleashed a wave of innovation that shaped economic and social progress.
Right.
And maybe more importantly, he unleashed a new mindset in the American people, which was we can turn the seemingly impossible possible. We have to make this the Earthshot decade, and we have to unleash that mindset again. We have innovation all over the world happening. We've got to believe we can do this and change the trajectory of the planet, and it will take all of us.
Speak loudly.
All right, that's Hannah Jones, of course, the CEO of the Earthshot Prize. I caught up with her earlier here at the Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit. So really interesting in terms of what their work is doing. And they really focus spotlights on entrepreneurs, folks who are coming up with new ways of kind of disrupting the establishment. We actually have somebody here who's part of the establishment. And
but he's looking to shake it up and disrupt it quite a bit. Very pleased right now to have with us Dr. Andrew Forrest. He's executive chairman of Fortescue Metals Group. He's on site with us at the Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit here at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Great to have you with us. How are you?
I'm in great shape, on fire. I'm so happy to have made this announcement and got it out. It's been millions of man hours to get it done.
Well, let's talk about this announcement because it's a big one. Over the next decade, you're looking to spend $6.2 billion to curb iron ore emissions at your mine. So you're moving away from diesel. And we're not talking carbon offsets here. We're talking about completely eliminating fossil fuels and going with renewable sources instead.
So there's no impact on the environment.
Exactly. So we're not moving away or curbing, we're stopping all fossil fuel use. I've been up to my sites, I've said to my major operators of these huge industrial sites, says, look, I'm coming up in 2026 and I'm going to switch off the diesel. I'm going to switch off the oil and gas lever. And if you guys do not have plans where I can keep them off, I'm probably going to shut you down. And they've come up with these most brilliant practical plans because they're now part of the problem and therefore part of the solution. And for $6.2 billion, we can step beyond fossil fuel and return almost $1 billion a year to shareholders. It's got to be a good investment, right?
All right, so help me out. Andrew, why now?
Because we have the technology now. I mean, I'm an investor in breakthrough energy. I'm an investor in this and that. But why wait? I mean, everyone's sticking around waiting. The planet, I promise you, is cooking. I'm an ecologist. What's happening in the oceans is way worse than what's happening on land. But it's blowing up on us all on land. You know, the youth across the world can see it. Carbon credits, fuel, everything's getting way more expensive. Yet renewable energy is free. Okay, and it's infinite. Why wait?
It's not always free and infinite, though. Right. It's not infinite in the sense of, okay, well, if you're using solar, there's nighttime. If you're using wind, there are days that are not windy. Yeah. And if you're using hydropower, there are some times that water levels fluctuate. So how are you accounting for all this?
And you've heard of fossil fuel, right?
Yeah.
They spend so much time pumping their gas down into these salt domes so they can draw it out later. We're not a lot different. I mean, we don't have to throw it down for months. We'll have batteries. We have pumped hydro, you know, water up to the top of the hill in the day and run it down at night. We have gravitational energy, which runs these trains of ours. We've got the biggest, heaviest trains on Earth, right? 500-kilometre trains. They take 40,000 tonnes of iron ore on their backs down to sea level. That's more than enough parabolic or gravity energy that you'll ever need to send that train back up the hill. So there's a huge train system currently pumping through millions and millions of litres of diesel, breaking itself, going down the hill. So stop that. Use that energy, send the train back up the hill. You've created an infinity train. No external source of power, no emissions. We're doing that for trucks, we're doing that for a fixed plant, different technologies, but technologies which exist today.
Andrew, how much of it is also, though, in terms of the timing, what's going on in terms of the macro environment? Obviously, we are all talking a lot more about energy and the energy crisis that we're seeing over in Europe, specifically because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Everybody all of a sudden is putting their foot on the gas pedal when it comes to alternative energy. It's been there, and yet the ramp up has taken longer. You talk about the technology being there, but how much of the macro forces are also at play?
So I'm seeing a ramp up of talk. I'm seeing a ramp up of panic, and there should be, because we've never had a drying event this year around the world, not in the last 100 years, in history. Record temperatures in history. Right. So there's a sense of panic now, but we are reacting to what is great for our shareholders. 6.2 billion in one-off, nearly $1 billion out, 820 million out every single year forever. And it does not take into account the $3 billion we earn on the way through. So we're going to build this thing out in the next several years. Not in 10 years, next several years. On the way through, we start saving money. We saved 80 million last year. On the way through, we'll save a further $3 billion. You take that $3 billion off the 6.2, you don't have 14 or 15% rate of return anymore. You have 25, 26% rate of return. That kind of beats Warren Buffett's miracle of 9%, right? Poof, and we're green.
So it's a business decision, or it's business and you're also just looking at the environment?
I am an ecologist, I am a scientist, yes, I'm a business person, but my shareholders will not tolerate philanthropy for a business. You do philanthropy with your dividends, Andrew, but our business must make money. This is a fabulous business decision.
So do the other miners, the Rio Tintos of the world and more, do they follow your lead?
Look, they're good guys. I've been in touch with the chief executives of all the big miners.
What have they told you?
They've said, how are you doing? Please tell us. Would you share? I said, of course. We'll have full how-to presentations. You get your senior leadership, I'll get my senior leadership. We'll break it down dollar by dollar, piece by piece, time interval by time interval, how we are doing it. Not will do it, are doing it.
Well, and I do wonder too, you know, as you do this, are there any obstacles that will come into play at this point, or you've already worked it all out? Because I do think about, as people transition, it's not always so fluid and smooth because there is such an establishment out there and pushback.
Look, I think because it has not been done before, there's no other company in the heavy manufacturing, heavy industry world that has done it. So I need the disbelief to go away. I mean, we started as a tiny little company and we challenged the biggest industry in the resources world, which is iron ore. It's like a closed shop, totally protected. Now we busted it open. We're one of the biggest players in the world, 200 million tons a year. That's not chopped liver, right? No. Spread around the world. Now we're taking that huge manufacturing center and stopping it using any fossil fuel. And people are saying, yeah, if you can do it, why isn't everyone? Well, that's the question. Don't question that we can do it. Question, why isn't everyone else?
Well, not everyone also has a background as an ecologist. That's part of it, perhaps. But I also wonder if you could take us more into your thinking behind this, because you and I spoke years ago, and you were on the forefront of thinking about the environmental concerns when it comes to mining. But something that I've been thinking about is, and I mean this with all due respect, if there's any sort of like atonement that you're thinking about here, because with all due respect, mining is something that is not inherently good for the earth.
Okay, well, unfortunately, if we were to stop mining, we wouldn't be sitting here, this building wouldn't exist, you know, everything would stop. So we have to do mining. Mining is not the problem. How we mine, that's the problem. We have to mine green. We have to mine zero emissions. The mining industry can step beyond fossil fuel. Now, I have a sense of atonement to my kids and to everybody because I'm part of the fossil fuel era. But I don't put coal in my iron ore. My product has zero carbon in it. There's nothing in it. So if I can persuade my customers to put hydrogen, not coal in it, then I'm super happy. But I haven't exported carbon. Okay, that's not my business. I've exported iron, and then carbon goes into the iron. I want to stop that. I'm saying to all my customers, we're going to give you green iron. First time in your life, you've got green iron ore. Now replace the coal with hydrogen, and you've got green steel.
Just real quickly, because we have you here and we're Bloomberg, what does the macro environment, on this Fed day, what does the macro environment look like to you right now?
We have to step carefully. You've got interest rate fluctuations. You've got a lunatic invading another country totally unfairly. So we have to step carefully. How we step carefully is by bringing our operating costs down to go from the lowest cost iron ore producer in the world to an even lower cost iron ore producer in the world. So our margins are maximised and we're burning no fossil fuels, so we're not exposed to torrents. We're not exposed to fossil fuel ups and downs and swings and roundabouts. We are taking our energy from the sun and the wind.
Dr. Andrew Forrest, Executive Chairman, Fortescue Metals Group. He's with us on site at the Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit at the Plaza Hotel here in New York City. Dr. Forrest, great to see you again.
Great
Thanks
to see
so much
you.
for joining
Thank you.
us.
Love your enthusiasm.
Great.
Good luck with it. Good luck. Look forward to hearing more.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Cheers.
much.
It is 1:20 on Wall Street. Let's get a check of the markets and this really important Fed decision day. We do hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell in just about 40 minutes. And in the form of a statement, and then we'll hear from him in a little over an hour with the press conference. Right now, the Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by close to 0.3%. The S&P 500 higher by 0.4%. And the NASDAQ higher right now by a little more than 0.3%. We are also seeing volumes pretty muted on a day like today. For the S&P 500, down a little more than 15%, and for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, down more than 25%.
Hey, just quickly, everybody, as we await for that Federal Reserve decision, which is just about 40 minutes away, just taking a look at the yield curve and the Treasury trade, in particular, that two-year note significantly going above that 4% mark today, just staying at that level. Looking at the 10-year note now with the yield of 3.58, but we will be watching that Treasury trade post that Fed announcement to see what kind of moves, especially when we get that update on the economic projections. All right, we want to take you back to the plaza. This is where we are at the Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit. And luckily for us, Catherine McKenna stopped by, chair of the UN High-Level Expert Group. She's former Minister of Environment and Climate Change of Canada. So on-site with her, on-site with us here. It's hard to kind of hear yourself think.
It is.
But Catherine, what's really wonderful, and I think even in our last conversation, just the conversations that we are having, and it does feel like we just talked with, Fortescue, and just the investment that they're making and really thinking about green energy, not even just thinking, but taking actions. How do you feel about, like, where the conversation is going, and how people are looking at climate change and really the impact and what we need to do now?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, we're seeing that climate change is having an impact. Like, you go to Puerto Rico and basically no one had any power underwater, but that's happening everywhere. In Canada, we had a town of Lytton literally incinerated. So that's the bad side. The good side is this is really the largest economic opportunity, not just in a decade, but in our lifetime. And now we need to translate the ambition that I think we've seen a lot of companies, financial institutions, cities and regions saying they want to be net zero. Obviously, we have the nations part of the Paris Agreement, but we need to actually see the action. And so that's what I'm working at as part of the Secretary General. He made this high-level group. It's got a very long acronym, like the UN says, but basically it's...
Does it have a long timeline? Or
no, super short. So actually that's quite good, because I'm into, like, let's get things done. We do not have time, and often we have a lot of chatting, and I'm a person of action. In Canada, we did a lot. We put a price on pollution, which if we had carbon pricing, I would be able to do a lot more. But the group is actually looking like, what do you need to do? What do you need to show progress? Like, don't just talk about 2050. We don't have time. I was just with Mike Bloomberg. He's like, look, I don't know whether we, 2030, or we're even talking far too long. Like, we got to talk about what we're doing now, what we're doing next year. And so it's really about getting corporates, financial institutions, cities and regions to say, okay, this is our plan, this is how we're going to transition. Good to identify the laggards, but also really positive in identifying folks that are doing things.
At the same time, though, I think that a lot of people might have the sense that we're much further behind than we thought we were. And I say that because of what's happening in Europe right now. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it came into stark relief this year just how reliant the entire world is on fossil fuels. How far behind are we? Because if you were to ask me a year ago, I would have painted a picture that we were so much further ahead when it comes to a transition than we actually are.
Well, I mean, I'm someone who also thinks we need to call things out. And the reality is, I mean, you either take things as a risk or an opportunity. And I worry that, we're going to say, well, look at what happened. We got an illegal war started by Russia. And so now all bets are off on climate action. Yeah. In fact, what we need to do is recognize that by, perpetuating the status quo, the status quo is like energy security is actually a massive risk to our economy, and climate change is having impacts now. So I think you've seen some good moves by Germany, but there has been opportunism by fossil fuel companies in many cases. And look, I just think we need to just get on with things and recognize, yes, energy poverty is a huge thing, so we have to be smart. In Canada, we did a price on pollution, gave the money back. So people that had less money actually were better off. And so I think you have to be smart about how you do that. But we need to make the quantum of investment now. We need to scale everything, and we need to do this fast. And so everything I do is about like, how do we find solutions? How do we not just identify problems and just get on with it?
I agree with you, right? Like there's a lot of talk that goes on, but what do we need to actually do? So what is the role of government and private sector in all of this? Because I do feel like investment money will go where they can make money, right?
Yeah.
And I also do feel like government policy can shape us to do the right thing, whether it's buy an electric vehicle, put solar on our roofs, or what have you. So what are those two components? What do they need to be doing right now?
Well, I mean, government and corporates need to work together, right? You can't just have government policy up here and then you aren't having the response. And sometimes, actually, the real economy can have a real impact on government. If you support, climate action, that can be really positive. If you lobby against it, that is very bad. So I think there could be this virtuous cycle, but everyone needs to scale up investment, and we need to deal with problems. So the amount of money we need is in the trillions, $3 trillion. So I see that as an opportunity. But to do that, we need blended finance. We need there to be some risk taken so that you then get the money flowing from the private sector, and then we can do this. I'm like a super realistic optimist, but I think this is a huge opportunity. But people need to see it in that spirit, and we have to fight the status quo all the time.
So how do you get the entire world on board with this? Because it's one thing for European countries to all be on the same page, and maybe Canada, and in some cases the US. But what about China? What about India? What about other developing economies?
Well, sure. Look, everyone needs to be on board, but it's not going to be linear. And that's the thing. Like, if everyone wants perfection, I'm sorry, that's not going to work on climate. I've seen it. And you're always going to have changes in government. You're going to have some corporates are going to be doing good things, and some are going to be greenwashing. Although the fact that folks feel the need to say that they're ambitious on climate is a positive signal. But I think, look, in what I'm working on, which is, financial institutions, corporates, how do we hold them accountable? Ultimately, we need government regulation, right? There's a limit to voluntary initiatives, and there's a competitiveness issue, right? Like, we don't want to make it so you're like the good guy coming out there working hard, and it's hard. Like, we need to reduce emissions, scale money. Sounds easy, but obviously, to do that, that's challenging. But you need to bring everyone in. So I think that's obviously needs to be leadership at the national level. Having said that, in countries like China and India, you can see how they are scaling in so many different ways, and they're playing a part in the ecosystem, like whether it's electric vehicles or solar. You're getting examples. But if anyone wants us to be orderly, and I often hear this, look, I was in the private sector before, everyone wants to be an orderly transition. I'm sorry, it's disorderly right now.
I mean, we've seen that this year.
Yeah.
It's been so disorderly.
Well, what's interesting, too, and I think about in the investment space, which we talk so much about, in ESG in particular, the amount of money that was flowing in, and I think we thought that was going to help facilitate that transition to alternative energy in a much more aggressive way, and it's going through a reckoning. So do we need that transparency or labeling so that we really understand initiatives, what they are doing and their impact on the environment, so that people who want to invest in things that really are good for the environment, is that a big deterrent to kind of getting us to a better place?
Well, I just believe in radical transparency. Right? It's better to have more data than not. And
or
I
just
know
transparency.
I think Bloomberg, that's like a basic principle, because people need to understand what's going on. And then you can make decisions. That's the whole point of the market. But we do need to better understand risk. Like the reality, the risk that people are incurring. If you're a company or financial institution doubling down on fossil fuels, look at where the world is going. We need to move. And as I say, look, you need to be able to call out greenwashing, which requires data, and saying if you're going to be super ambitious and saying you're going to be net zero and you're going the wrong direction. Well, I think people need to know that. But on the flip side, I also think you need to recognize the good players. And that's why getting data out and distinguishing between the people who are just saying, I'm going to be amazing, I'm doing nothing, or going the wrong way, and the people who are doing, I'm going to be amazing, and I'm doing the hard work, is key.
What I want to ask you is the Earthshot Prize, right? This is innovators, disruptors. Here, there are lots of conversations. As you come to an event like this, what is it that's jumping out for you right now when we think about what's going on in the environment, the climate, and changes to it?
It's funny because sometimes you can get down. I'm like a realistic optimist, sometimes an optimistic realist, but ultimately I'm actually a competitive swimmer. So I'm head down, do the work, drive for the wall.
And you're used to just staring at the same thing for the entire time.
I know, it is actually really boring. That is one downside of swimming. But you get disciplined, and you know that you got to do the work. So sometimes you can be, disappointed or feel like this government sucks or like whatever. But then I meet these innovators, and I was like, this is the goal, like the zone where we need to be. We need to be rewarding people that have scalable solutions, and we need to finance them.
Okay, before we let you go, because how did you describe yourself? A realistic optimist? Is that
Well,
what you
it
said?
depends. Some days I'm an optimistic realist. But
Okay.
yeah.
We understand what state actors can do, what non-state actors can do, and what Earthshot Prize winners can do. But what about us as everyday Americans or everyday Canadians? What can we do? Because I think oftentimes it feels like, okay, I'm not using plastic bags, I'm separating my recycling, and I'm taking the subway instead of driving. But does it matter at all?
But it's weird because all those things matter. And I used to hear this, like, I'd see a kid and they'd be, using a metal straw. And then people would tweet at me, oh my God, that's so useless. But I said, you know what that kid is saying? I actually believe in the environment. I believe in climate change. All those solutions are really important. And like heat pumps, there are all these like kind of boring things that are actually really critical. The cost of a lot of these innovations is coming down. But the other thing you can do is you can vote and you can go look for folks that actually share your beliefs. If you care about climate, go see what people are saying about climate. Are they committed to it? Are they actually demonstrating that with action? And I saw that. Look, I'm a recovering politician. And
I like your labels.
I know. I'm a recovering lawyer too. Like I'm recovering from a lot of things. I'm still a mom, so I haven't recovered from teenagers, But I think that I saw this in politics. Like, it really helps if you have regular people who are saying, yeah, you know what? I support you. I'm going to go out and volunteer. I'm going to get engaged. Or when when we put a price on pollution, I know it's hard in the U.S. when you talk about carbon tax, carbon pricing, but actually I got support of financial institutions. Once you get two, all of the majors came on board, and it really helps when people say, yeah, this is smart policy. Like, this is actually making it not free to pollute, for example.
Thank you so much. Loved it. Gave us a lot to think about. Good luck with everything, and look forward to hearing more. Catherine McKenna, she's chair of the UN High-Level Expert Group, former Minister of Environment, Climate Change of Canada, on site with us at the Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit. We are just a few minutes, about 29 minutes away from the latest Fed decision, and right now we are still seeing yields hold towards their highs. We're seeing the equity markets in terms of the trade waiting for that latest Fed decision. We've seen a lot of volatility, but we're in the green. But again, I'm watching those yields. We'll be watching them in particular to see what kind of reaction we get when the Fed puts out some of their projections. That 2-year note, most sensitive to what the Fed will do, coming off that 4% mark at 3.99. But just
passing it for the first time since 2007.
It's very significant. Our team on television getting ready to count you down to that FOMC decision on radio and on TV and on YouTube. Let's send it over to them.
Gramo thinks that Credit Suisse should do a merger.
No.
Is that what you said?
Oh, come
Live from
on.
New York City. For our audience worldwide, the Fed decides. Starts right now.
I thought Credit Suisse was going to... This is a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrell, and Lisa Abramowitz. Bloomberg Surveillance. The Fed decides.
Tell us all about it, Lisa. Tell us all about it. Live from New York City. For our audience worldwide on TV and radio, counting down to a Fed decision and Chairman Powell news conference alongside Tom Keene and Lisa Abramowitz. I'm Jonathan Farrow. Alongside us is going to be Scott Minerd in just a moment. TK, we've got to kick things off with twos at 4%.
Twos, absolutely. And the history of this, which Scott Minerd knows and all of our guests know, Richard Clarida coming up later, is August, the third Thursday of August 07 is when the crisis began. The 2-year yield 4%, October 16th of that year. That's the last time we saw this.
Lisa, a 2-year at 4%, a 10-year at 358-ish. Yields high going into this one.
Right, and it is real yields, and people are trying to game out the economic pain versus some of the inflation that is sticky. No, we talk about the economic pain, right? We have this question, is it time to go into duration? Is it time to go into treasury yields at nearly 3.6%? Not quite yet seems to be the resounding decision, at least given the fact that yields are continuing
to focus of this decision, Lisa, and you know it well, in about 27 minutes' time, it's not just going to be about the rate hike. Most people assume it'll be 75. It's going to be the forecast. For all this talk of pain, will the forecast capture some of that pain?
And will they revise upward their unemployment rate to say, we are serious in terms of what they expect, to your point? And we're hearing about, just earlier this morning when we were speaking with Peter Hooper of Deutsche Bank, and he's talking about Nehru going to 5%. All of a sudden, this is a new equation for the employment
unemployment mark.
There's this talk about pain, and we make jokes about it with Brammo, who's living it every day. But what I would suggest here,
What's he talking about?
What I would suggest here,
I get fired
you
every
go
other
back
day.
to Truman and McChesney Martin. You go back to LBJ and Arthur Burns. There is, at the end of the day, a social construct. Do we want this Fed to force a recession? Do we want this Fed to force a higher unemployment rate? And it's a resounding part of the dialogue saying, no, we don't.
Are we going to have trouble around this table today?
No, absolutely not.
I sense we're going to.
You tell me I'm going to say something slanderous.
Scott's going to sort out TK in just a moment. Your equity market set up as follows going into this Fed decision. Your equity market positive 0.5% on the S&P 500, on the Nasdaq up 0.5% also. Lisa, it's just about the bond market. Yields higher at the front end by 2 or 3 basis points, just short of 4% at the moment on a 10-year 357.
So have we baked in a hawkish surprise, right? And that's one of the main questions as we have discussions today. Coming up, we have an incredible roster of people. TD Securities, Priya Misra, Deutsche Bank's Matt Lazzetti. They will be taking us up to the Fed rate decision at 2 p.m. Then immediate reaction from former Fed Vice Chair Rich Clarida. I am so interested to hear how he translates what we're hearing into the reaction on the ground when you are in the Fed room. And then finally, breaking down the chairman's news conference with some post-Powell commentary with BlackRock's Jeff Rosenberg. And of course, sitting next to us, Scott Minerd, which I cannot wait to hear from.
It's going to be interesting today, to say the least, and what we're going to do is inform you with different opinions. Leading on opinion through all of this most uncertain 2022 has been Scott Minerd. He's Global Chief Investment Officer of Guggenheim. He and I are grievously concerned as Aaron Judge go to the Dodgers or to the Mets. We'll talk about that another time, but that's the stakes involved today. Why is this Fed meeting different than any other?
This sounds like we're having the Passover. The message here has got to be around the Fed's credibility on fighting inflation, and that is, it's not just about what rate increase we're getting today. It's going to be in the statement that we see and what comes at the press conference. But, you know, this debate about 75 basis points or 100 basis points, you know, it's interesting. I told someone this morning, I said, if I were sitting on that committee, I would argue, we know it's coming, raise rates 100 basis points. Let's send a real message here. But I don't think they have the guts to do that.
Why do you think they won't do that?
They just don't have the guts to do it. Or
what would happen if they did? What do you actually think would happen if they did?
Well, I think, John, let the market sort it out. I think the bond market would probably rally because they would say, you know what, these people are really serious. And, you know, the ultimate decline that I think we're going to see in stocks, it may accelerate it, but let's get it behind us and have it over.
One thing we haven't taken seriously over the last few months together around this table has been their forecasts. Do you think that we need to see some credible forecasts from this Federal Reserve now? And by credible, if you're talking about pain in a speech at Jackson Hole, shouldn't the forecast capture some of that pain now?
I think it has to. Or what did that whole speech at Jackson Hole mean? Right. But, you know, look, John, I was at the conference at Stanford for central banks at the Hoover Institution. And there were people there who were talking about the neutral rate being at 6% and even higher. None of these forecasts, no one is saying anything like that. Now, personally, I don't think the neutral rate is that high. But, you know, there are a lot of people out there who are very smart, who think that the neutral rate is much higher than anything that we've seen in the forecast.
So let's say the Fed goes ahead and does what you want. What happens? What are the ripple effects? You say, rip the Band-Aid off, let's go.
Right.
But does it become a self-fulfilling prophecy where you remove some of the strength that still is keeping the hopes of a soft landing alive, at least in some of the rhetoric?
Well, you know, hope is not a strategy. Right. So if that's the Fed's approach,
Bloomberg surveillance. Speak for yourself. We do it every day. What's going to be the strategy?
Please carry on.
I think the strategy is to say, look, we're serious. We're going to get this done, and we are going to suffer whatever consequences we have to suffer. Now, it's interesting. We're all talking about recession. I personally believe we're in a recession. It's an extraordinary one because unemployment is a tick. You know, historically, we've never gotten prices to start to fall without having unemployment substantially higher than where we are. So at least a half a point and probably a point higher.
So you put out a series of tweets where you were talking about the richness or the potential opportunities within corporate credit, particularly investment grade, the higher rated company bonds. Can you see the value hold in credit, even if stocks absolutely tumble from here?
Look, all credit spreads are going to widen if that's the case. I think that I'm caught in a world of relative value. That is, people pay money managers to be invested. When you tell them you're going to put them into treasury bills, they tend to say, why am I paying you? So, if I've got to pick something, investment grade credit looks pretty good. Now, I did make a comment earlier this week that I think there is what I called a generational opportunity here, which is a lot of unicorns and companies that we've seen go public in the last year or two have built their business models on a theory that they're going to be able to continue to perpetually roll over debt at rates that just are unrealistic, like 6%. I mean, I don't want to pick on any company, but just pick Carvana. Right? So
don't pick one, but just pick one. This show's sponsored by Carvana, but continue.
That's right. But I mean, there are bonds that are coming due. They yield 13%. So what's the strategy with Carvana? There's only one of two strategies, right? One is you're going to get your principal back and you're going to earn 13%. Or two, they're going to have to hand the keys to the cars and the company over to you.
I'm sure you didn't mention that company by accident. What are you doing?
No. I have no interest in Carvana. So,
well, I'm just wondering. You said there was a big opportunity here.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at these sorts of companies to say, should we be buying these companies with the idea that ultimately they're good, sound business models, that if they were just levered, they would work. And there are a lot of stuff out there, especially stuff that was de-SPAC'd, where they need cash, and the clock is ticking.
First of all, you mentioned generational opportunity. That's called a third marriage. Let me move on to what Nassim Taleb said this week, which is real simple. All of a sudden, the gravity's back in physics. We've been working with physics without gravity. We're back to a risk-free rate. From Guggenheim, do you see the end of the zombie companies? They're going to be forced out over the next cycle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to me, it's going to be stunning.
Right. This looks a lot to me like the internet bubble. I remember...
But do we have companies with profits, unlike in 99 and 00?
Today?
Yeah. Do we have some companies making money?
Yeah, we do. But we have a lot of companies that aren't. Yeah. And, talk to me about EV companies that are out there whose whole business model requires that they keep raising capital.
What about Bitcoin? We got 15 seconds. What about Bitcoin? Come on. 400,000.
Yeah, well, put it this way, that's akin to me saying that I think ultimately the S&P will get to 100,000, right? Give it enough.
Can we quote you on that?
Yeah, right. Ultimately, we'll get there. But, for the near term, I don't see any of these cryptocurrencies having any value. And I think Bitcoin and some of the work I've seen on Bloomberg, the correlation to the stock market's so tight that I stand by my 8,000 number before where we'll see a real bottom.
I wanted your Carvana call.
Yeah, they'll be calling me today, I'm sure.
Price target on that. Coming up, Scott Miner is going to stick with us. Then we're going to be speaking with TD's Priya Misra, Deutsche Bank's Matt Lazzetti. Matt Lazzetti thinks Fed funds could get somewhere close to 5% next year. All of that coming up. Live from New York. This is Bloomberg.
Imagine simply climbing a cable into space. The concept is known as the space elevator. Not only could it significantly change how we leave planet Earth, but it could also completely transform humanity's relationship with space. And there are scientists who think we could have already built it.
We have the material, we have the technology, we have the lasers, we have the climbers, we have all of it. If a private entity wants to build it, or a government, they can build it. It'll change society. We have no clue how colonizing into space, how really spreading out into space will really change our society over the next 50 to 200 years. It'll be completely different.
When U.S. jobs numbers are released, Bloomberg brings you crucial data at terminal speed and instant expert analysis. Nobody covers jobs day like Bloomberg.
The all-important Fed meeting.
It's happening.
75 basis points.
We are expecting 75.
Another 75 basis point hike.
But on the message that accompanies it.
Less is more at this point.
It's a delicate balance today.
It'll be more data dependent, short and sweet, a la what Chair Powell gave us at Jackson Hole.
Ripping up the script then and channeling his inner Volcker.
The reality is Powell is extremely hawkish.
Chairman Powell has got one mission: stamp out inflation, deal with inflation.
The hot core CPI print that we saw.
It puts the Fed into overdrive.
This is really mounting misery for the Fed.
Miserable, just absolutely miserable catching up with everyone today. Great to catch up with them, but everything they said was absolutely miserable. The decision for the Fed is 15 minutes away. Going into it, the price action looks a little something like this in the equity market, pushing just a little bit higher. Fed days tend to do these things. Equities up by 0.6% on the S&P, on the Nasdaq up by 0.7%. In the bond market, it's just been one-way traffic over the last couple of months for a 10-year yield. 357 right now, a 2-year up by a couple of basis points, just short of 4%. Started the year at 76 basis points. 12 months ago today, it was at about 21 basis points, Tom. That is a major change from where we've been.
And we see it in FX as well, John. We're seeing some movement. Euro weaker, sterling making a dash to a 112 handle. We're not there yet, but I'm sorry, FX has deteriorated. Stronger dollar since the show this morning.
And the S&P and the BOE are going to have a problem tomorrow, aren't they, Tom?
They are going to have a big problem. It's a reason to stay with us tomorrow. We've got some great follow-up analysis of what we're going to see on this Fed meeting. We've got a terrific lineup of guests quickly here with Scott Miner. Scott, by the way, 100,000 on SPX is 2,067. Good luck with that. I want to talk to you about
20 years old.
Yeah, well, you and I'll be around for that. I want to talk to you about credibility today. How does Chairman Powell reinforce credibility and yet speak to his different constituencies?
Well, I think, look, the toughest message the chairman has here is to say that he's going to stay on inflation, and that's the sole priority, when we all know that this is putting the economy at risk and ultimately putting employment at risk. And one of the people that work for me has the opinion that, you know, they're going to push on rates until they see unemployment go up. That is a message that the chair of the Federal Reserve cannot send. Because can you imagine how Congress, how Elizabeth Warren?
Sure.
I mean, they'll have a heyday with that.
Are they going to send that message in the forecast regardless today? Isn't that the direction of travel for the forecast?
They should.
12 minutes.
They should. If they're going to be realistic and honest, they should. But maybe, you know, they understand that they've got political issues too.
Let us continue forward, and we do with someone that John identified months and months and months ago as being prescient. Priya Misra, flat out our call of the year on rates with TD Securities, and tag team with Matthew Lazzetti of Deutsche Bank, who flat out was the first one to use the R word at recession. Matt, let me start with you just to keep going here. Do you reaffirm your recession call off of this meeting today?
I think absolutely. We expect the Fed to deliver another 75 basis point rate increase today. We think they deliver another 75 basis point rate increase in November. We think they deliver a near Fed 5% terminal rate early next year, because that is what is necessary in order to get inflation down. And I think their forecast will show movement in that direction, not really throwing away the soft landing baseline yet, but likely an unemployment rate that's rising to about 4.5%. I don't think that's enough to get inflation down. We think you need to see an unemployment rate that's probably 5.5% or above in order to get inflation down over time. But the Fed should continue that narrative shift towards a harder landing, towards some pain that is going to be necessary for the economy.
It seems, Priya, as though the market is prepared for this. We're looking now at 4% two-year yields. We're looking at a yield curve that has been inverted. But is it surprising to you, and you nailed this call about the inversion in the yield curve, is it surprising to you that it's not steepening, that it's not inverting even more at a time when longer-term yields aren't coming in the way that so many people thought they would?
Sure. So I think the market is priced for a hawkish message. But the data is held up as well. So should long-term rates, I actually think long-term rates have peaked. I think the move up in real rates is very damaging to not just financial conditions, but the economy. But the economy is still holding up. And I think this is what the issue is, that, monetary policy takes a while to show up in the data. The economic data, beyond the interest-sensitive sectors, the economic data is holding up. So I think that long end is struggling to rally. When you start to see the weakness show up, and we think the consumer does start to slow down into year end, the labor market might be a little slow to pick that up. But as the economy slows down, that's when that inversion gets longer, might get more inverted. Long end rates, I think, are a great buy at that point. I would actually say it makes sense to start buying now as a hedge against risk assets, because the Fed, we're all going to look at the Fed for preemptive easing, and they're going to say, no, inflation's too high. We're a single mandate central bank. Until we get inflation much lower, that's when I think those long end rates fall much more, because we should be pricing in cuts well through accommodative levels, and the market's not pricing that in right now. I think it's all about the data.
Priya, that's the call on 10s. What's the call on 2s?
That is a really tricky one. I mean, our view for terminal rate, we're not that far from Matt. We're at 4.5. So I would say that 2s should hang around here. At some point, it'll make sense to buy 2s when the Fed's done hiking. But, the risk reward is not great in the front end, because if inflation stays high, and it's notoriously hard to forecast inflation, particularly rents, that can stay high for a while. And the Fed, I think, just keeps going. They're telling us that Jackson Hole message was very clear, that they're focused on just one thing. Inflation is public enemy number one. So I think that front-end rates are still vulnerable, especially if inflation stays.
Lisa, Michael Dardick heated today in agreement with Priya Misra that now is the time to begin to acquire bonds.
Well, and particularly on the long end, and I'd love your take on that, Matt Lazzetti, this idea that we haven't seen the bid, a reliable bid into the long end at a time when people are saying the Fed has to recognize the fact that they're going to cause pain and it will bring down growth.
Yeah, so I think there's certainly a few things going on. One, I think we've gotten more confidence in the near-term economy in terms of we're not entering an imminent recession. I think, two, there's just substantial uncertainty about the inflation outlook. And as long as there's that inflation risk premium in there, that will help to, I think, divert some demand away. And three, you have a global cycle where you have tightening going on across the globe, the ECB, everybody at this point. And that means upward pressure on global yields. It means that a little bit less demand for the U.S. And so I think that coordinated effort helps to lift U.S. yields a little bit.
Scott, what do you make of this call from Matt Lazzetti, that Naira might be close to 5%, that Fed funds might have to get there too? Well, close to 5% next year.
Well, I mean, look, there are a lot of, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of smart people out there like John Taylor who would probably suggest that rate's even higher. So, I had to say that I was actually going to ask Matt that question, is what is leading you, what rationale is leading you to this 5% level? And in addition to that, how are you defining recession? Because my view of recession has been that you get negative economic growth. I argue with a lot of people that recession means unemployment rises. So, Matt, I don't know, what's your rationale behind all this?
Sure. So on the first question, it's two things. It's looking at policy rules, both the Taylor rule and what's a balanced approach rule that puts more weight on the labor market. But it's also just looking historically. The Fed has always gotten the nominal Fed funds rate above core PCE inflation late in the cycle. And so as our inflation forecast has moved higher, we've had to move up the terminal rate. And I don't think the Fed can rely on forecasts that the inflation is going to come down. I think they really need to get it above spot inflation. In terms of recession, it's become very complicated. Certainly with a technical recession in the first half of this year, 2 consecutive quarters. I think from the Fed's perspective, it's all about the labor market. Whether or not we get negative growth or zero growth is almost irrelevant. It's whether or not the labor market begins to deteriorate, whether or not that begins to loosen, because that's what they need to see to get inflation down.
John, help me here. Did Miner just take over the show?
He did.
I think I just want to make note of that. That's
Scott's
good. He
always
did a
going to
good
ask a
job.
better question than us.
It was smooth, you know.
Well, I'm looking for a new job.
Okay, that's good. Good.
Swap. We can work that out.
We can do it.
We can work
It's
that
a short work
I
day.
don't know how Guggenheim would feel if the bow tie walked onto the trading floor, but
Different from all of us.
You'd have to give up the Dodger season tickets. Right now, let's go to Priya Misra to save the hour, and Priya can do that. Priya, I believe it's yield up, price down. The pros, particularly in credit, like to talk about spreads and all that. The fact is, retail and institutional Wall Street pensions and all are facing huge bond losses. As we creep higher in yield, do we get convexity where it speeds up out of the stock market? How does that unfold in an experience none of us have ever experienced?
So you make a good point that they are facing negative total returns. And when you get negative total returns, bonds have been seeing outflows. So I would argue we're already seeing some of that convexity in the asset management side. I think the insurance side actually might see some inflows because you've not seen total yields, this level for a very long period of time. So I do think there could be some buying from the insurance pension side, but the negative convexity you're talking about from the bank portfolios that are facing negative, maybe unrealized losses, or from the asset manager side where they continue to see outflows, I think is making this environment so tough for fixed income. And we could always rely on global, money coming into the U.S. Well, global rates are rising. I'm watching the BOJ with great concern. If there's any change there, I think it has big ripple effects across the U.S. as well. So, yes, I think the supply demand for fixed income is not great, which is why, back to Lisa's question, why isn't the long end rallying? Well, we need weaker data. Otherwise, you don't have a positive supply demand dynamic. We really need that weaker data for people to find that safety in 10-year treasuries.
And Scott, I'd love your take on that Japanese call, because everyone's watching what's going on over there, saying that the yield on 10-year treasuries could go up to 5% if they abandon the yield curve control in order to shore up their currency.
Right. Well, I mean, look, I think the Bank of Japan is caught in a real dilemma here because you can't control the exchange rate and the supply and interest rates at the same time, right? You can't control the supply of money and the exchange rate at the same time. So one or the other is going to give eventually. And, I think it's just a matter of time until they have to start adjusting yield curve control. But, that's interesting because I think when they start to adjust yield curve control, it's a snowball effect, meaning, where does it stop? Does the Bank of Japan just lose control of everything? And I think ultimately we will expect a much weaker yen, just like we'll get a weaker euro and a weaker pound from here.
And so, Matt Lazzetti, barring some sort of trigger event like that, is there this concern that there's going to be some sort of boomerang effect, that the Fed's going to be raising rates? We don't really feel the effect very quickly on the economy, and slam, all of a sudden something will happen, and you'll feel not only the tightening that has a lag effect, but also that exogenous development.
Yeah, I think certainly that is the risk for the Fed, that if they are so focused on the spot data, particularly lagging data like the labor market and rental inflation, that they risk overdoing it in some sense. I don't view that as a policy mistake in the current environment. I think that they need to tighten financial conditions substantially. They need to risk a recession in order to bring inflation down, and that the real policy mistake would be not tightening enough, as we saw during the 1970s, where you had these successive rounds of having to go through multiple recessions in order to bring inflation down. I think the Fed views it similarly. So they want to skew towards being too hawkish, towards raising rates too much, because they think that ultimately that means less pain for the economy.
Matt Lazzetti, Priya Misra, to the both of you, thank you. Just to pick up on that at the end there, Scott, that's a line basically that came from Chairman Powell in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. He said it himself, a failure to restore price stability would mean far greater pain. Does he just read that speech again in 33 minutes?
Well, I think so. It's that's the message he's got to reiterate. He's he's got to underline. But, it's interesting. I want to comment one thing about Priya's comments. First off, as an asset manager, we're seeing huge inflows from insurance companies. There's a lot of demand for insurance products, which they buy long-duration assets. The other thing is I agree with her view more, and the place where I might disagree with Matt is that the deceleration in prices is happening much faster than people are saying. And
this is something that Dominic Constant, Lisa, picked up on a little bit earlier from Mizuho. He said exactly the same thing.
That basically it's already in the works, we just aren't considering it, and so this is the soft landing argument, not necessarily meaning that there's not going to be an increase in unemployment. That's the reason why it's important to define what you mean by soft landing, but that you are going to see a little help, a little bit of a luckier situation, at least for the Federal Reserve, going into next year.
I'm thinking back to a week ago when Mark Cabana of Bank of America caught up with us.
It's a great interview.
He talked about the risk of the Federal Reserve overdoing it. I've had one comment from a Bloomberg subscriber in the last 20 minutes or so, and perhaps this is a question for Rich Clarida a little bit later in the program. Ask your guest about the lag time for rate hike effects. This Fed has done so much in just 6 months. They've done as much in 6 months as they did in 3 years in the previous rate hiking cycle. TK, they've done a lot.
They've done a lot. They got a lot more to go. And I think the consensus is we're not even to neutral. Maybe today we're at neutral. Maybe it's the 2 meetings to the end of the year. But we do have a litmus paper to this from Jackson Hole. The Bloomberg Dollar Index, including a lot of EM, has strengthened 2.5%. That may not sound like a lot to listeners and viewers. That's a big number, John, in a short time.
Bob Michael of JP Morgan Asset Management, he said we're only halfway through this. We're only halfway there.
Yeah, and Bloomberg Economics came out and said that there's usually a 12 to 18-month lag to that question. That's their prediction before you really start to see the effects of monetary tightening. So if we're not even halfway there, there's more to come, and we haven't yet felt the full effects of where we are right now. It raises just the uncertainty and sort of the reason why people are on both sides.
There's another one coming in about 30 seconds. Scott, this was awesome. It's good to see you. Thanks as always.
Good to
Thank
see
you very much.
Thank you.
Going into that Fed decision, 22 seconds away, your equity market looks like this. Positive 0.7% on the S&P. On the NASDAQ, up 0.9%. In the bond market, yields higher, much higher since this Fed last met. Through 4% briefly on a 2-year. Right now, 396, call it 397. We can go and get that Fed decision for you now. We can head to D.C. and catch up with Mike McKee.
A unanimous Fed raises the benchmark rate 75 basis points as anticipated and offers no sign that it is ready to stop tightening. The dot plot shows the median forecast for Fed funds next year, by the end of this year rather, at 4.4%, which suggests about another 125 basis points over the next 2 meetings, which leaves a 75 basis point move at the next meeting in November on the table. In 2023, the median forecast anticipates no rate cuts, but one more 25 basis point move to 4.6%. For the year, the committee says it was evenly divided. 6 saw 4.9%, 6 saw 4.75, and 6 saw 4.5. One member put the top rate next year and this year at just 4%. So there's still a possibility we see a lot more increases in 2023. The statement almost word for word the same as the one in June. Policymakers noting they are highly attentive to inflation risks and anticipate that the ongoing increases in the target rate will be appropriate. There's a wide dispersion of forecasts for 2024 and 2025. The median suggesting that the Fed funds rate falls to 3.9% in 2024 and to 2.9% in 2025. That's because inflation takes longer to fall, not reaching the Fed's target until 2025, headline and core. This year, inflation headline 5.4%, core is going to be 4.5%. Next year, headline 2.8%, and in 2024, 2.3%, core 3.1% next year, 2.3% in 2024. Now, Fed officials also bumped up their unemployment forecast to a median of 3.8% this year, 4% 4.4% next year and in 2024, and 4.3% in 2025. Growth takes a big hit this year. Annual GDP marked down to just 0.2% from the 1.7% they saw in June. The economy will expand 1.2% next year, 1.7% in 2024, and reaches a 1.8% potential rate in 2025. Finally, as I mentioned, almost no change to the statement, just 2 words in the opening sentence. Recent indicators point to modest growth in spending and production. In June, they said those had softened.
Mike McKee, thank you. Ton of numbers to work through there from Mike McKee. So let's go through it together. Just open up the summary of economic projections off the back of this. So GDP gets a cut to the forecast. Unemployment gets kicked higher. Inflation gets kicked higher as well. And so does the dot plot in a major way. The market's responding to this, as you might expect. Equities heading south on the S&P 500. Yields heading north, particularly at the front end of the curve. We're up 13 basis points now on a 2-year. Going into the decision, we took out 4%. We're basically on our way to taking out 4.1% right now on a 2-year. As you might expect off the back of that, the dollar is a whole lot stronger. TK, you can take your pick on what currency pair you'd like to see. Let's just pick up on sterling as an example. 112 handle going into the OE tomorrow. 112.50 right now. That currency pair with a 1% move.
I would say the word plunge or cratered is probably what you want to see here. In international economics, folks, dollar moves are very small but very important. Maybe only yen at 144.48 is there, but sterling is stunning. Euro even more so, I would say. It's just all of these moves and these dialogues change the game for the governor tomorrow with the Bank of England.
4.6 is your dot, Bramo, for 2023.
It matters for markets. What you're seeing is a very hawkish 75 basis point hike, and that is basically forecasting there is more to come, and they are willing to take pain in the economy, and the market is responding.
Yields up, Tom, 13 basis points on the 2-year.
There they are.
Big move. Let's see if it sticks.
After an already big move.
Yeah, let's do one more look here at the data. I think it's so important on the fixed income market. The 2s10 spread. Priya Misra, negative 50 basis points. That's where she was when everybody said, no, it could never happen.
10 basis points moved just today, by the way.
Yeah, less than that. And the real yield, by the time you get to your critical show on Friday, John, where's the real yield going to be? 1.30, 1.19?
Based on this price action, Tom, I might not make it to Friday.
Well, we will have to see. It is a Fed meeting, and this is a different Fed meeting for us. He's the former vice chair of the Federal Reserve System. Richard Clarida joins us, of course, always and forever with Columbia University and a small institutional shop on the West Coast, PIMCO. Rich, thank you so much for being with us on this historic day. Yeah. I want to touch back to what you did at Columbia with a guy named Galley and a guy named Gertler. 1999, you looked at the science of monetary policy, which has exploded in this pandemic crisis that we have. Your summary there is about imperfect information. How blind are good people like you right now?
Well, I think obviously we and the Fed are navigating imperfect information. I think what you're seeing today, and I agree with the previous comment, this was a very hawkish 75 with the dots. One thing I would say is dispute any rumors you hear about the demise of forward guidance. The committee's relying a lot on forward guidance to tighten financial conditions. And I think the fog of uncertainty is the nature of the pandemic shock, and the policy response and the reopening means that a lot of the traditional models and guideposts aren't really helping. And so I think this is more of a look at the data as it comes in and wait for the inflation data to fall.
These forecasts previously, Rich, and good to see you, by the way, but it's been a while. They were called aspirational, fanciful. We've now got an unemployment rate in their forecast for 22 of 4.4, for 23 rather for 4.4, for 24 of 4.4%. Do you think they've ripped the Band-Aid off just yet, or are they doing it slowly still?
I wouldn't say it's ripped off. I think but the contrast with where the committee was in March, which was what I've called the immaculate disinflation, with no rise in unemployment, no fall in growth below trend. So I think this is recognizing that, as the chair said, some pain will be part of disinflation. My own personal view is it probably will be more than the rise indicated by the dots, but I think it is acknowledging that the disinflation is going to cause that pain.
So the risk is to higher unemployment, to even higher Federal Reserve rates off the back of this, you think?
Well, we may not need higher Federal Reserve rates because this is a pretty muscular liftoff this year, and I guess another 25 next year as well. And it clearly pushes the funds rate into the high end of the fours. If inflation comes down as the SEP projects, this could well be enough. The challenge, though, there's a lot of inertia inflation, and obviously the labor market is red hot, and so this is going to be challenging. But I think right now the committee has put in place a path for rates that could well make sense, but not without causing the pain that the chair referred to.
I was just going through the trajectory for inflation as it comes down. I wonder if you still think this is aspirational. 5.4 down to 2.8, down to 2.3 this year for core PCE, 4.5 next, 3.1 the year after that, 2.3. Does that sound about right to you? Is that the appropriate time frame to think about getting these numbers down to back towards the twos?
John, what I called the plausible best case scenario is by the end of the year, inflation's running below 3, and I think it'll take some good policy